This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate second part of What If Naruto Was Trained by Hiruzen and Jiraiya. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Just 3 seconds before, Kakashi jumped out of the building he had been flung into. The Leaf Junin swerved gracefully to dodge the hail of bone pieces his opponent had thrown at him. The Auto Shinobi quickly closed the gap between them, unconcerned with his careless avoidance. The copy ninja was more than prepared to confront the head of the department thanks to the keen vision of his single Sharingan eye. A lone kunai appeared in his right hand as though it had been magically conjured out of thin air. In order to carefully cut through the Adam's apple, the skilled Leaf Ninja swung the iron blade in a broad arc at his oncoming adversary. For all the good it did him, the blade might as well have been made of paper. The Sound Ninja raised his left arm to brush aside the swipe with his forearm, and the thick bones of the Kagaya clan more than helped against the slash. He took a single step forward with his right foot and then threw his arm forward in an open palm strike with the same side. Kakashi slightly dropped his left shoulder, gritting his teeth as the jagged bone that had stuck out in the form of a crude spike tore into his tactical vest material as easily as a shark cutting through water. The Leaf Junin shifted his weight and stepped back onto his left foot before using the opposite leg to deliver a swift front kick infused with chakra. The Leaf Ninja threw his knife at the man's eye before his body flickered away, and Orochimaru's elite soldier grunted as the blow to his sternum rocked him back onto his heels. In less than 2 complete seconds, the Leaf Elite flashed through a series of hand seals after emerging from the rapid transit with a 3-limbed slide. He then dropped to one knee to stop the remainder of his momentum. Kakashi's head snapped up just in time to see his opponent's flash of movement, and he slammed both palms down on the rough concrete that made up the streets. The Leaf Ninja modified his course using his improved vision before directing his life energy onto the ground beneath his hands. Earth Release. Earth Flow River, Doden, Doryu Taiga. The Kagaya was directly hit by the earth style ninjutsu. The ground at the white-haired shinobi's feet, which was about a meter across, changed from solid stone to a flowing stream of mud in what felt like just 2 seconds. He lost his footing beneath him and had to lean forward to regain his balance, which caught the Auto Ninja completely off guard. Kakashi flashed through another set of seals as his opponent tried to anchor himself by slamming the bone blade that stuck out of his palm into the dirt mud. Gokakayu, Fire Release, Great Fireball, is the Kaden. Before the wave of flames engulfed his form, the Auto Shinobi looked up just in time to snarl. After dropping his hand from its place near his mouth to watch the flames rush over his opponent, Kakashi was almost blinded by the Sound Ninja's subsequent eruption of another wave of dark chakra. With his eyes shielded, the Leaf Junin was able to roll to his left just in time to hear the telltale whistle of a projectile sliding through the air. The Sound Ninja closed in on the Leaf Junin, sending trained senses into overdrive. Kakashi got up just in time to use his left hand to swat another palm thrust at his chest. He ducked under the returning first arm after jerking his head to the right to avoid the follow-up slash with the other hand. Under his younger opponent's guard, the Junin charged forward, slamming his right shoulder into his opponent's chest, only to have one of the now protruding rib bones pierce his throat. The Kagaya prodigy looked down calmly as the Junin hit the ground, both hands attempting to stop the blood from flowing. With a sly smile on his face, he observed the renowned Leaf Ninja's futile attempts to preserve his life's blood. He whispered, "Dance of the Willow. It was foolish of you to try and delay me. In the end you died like the simple trash that you are." That was the extent of the sentence's development. Before dispersing into a flash of light, he saw the dying Junin suddenly start to glow brightly. After that, a surge of pure lightning chakra entered his body. As the Raiden Cage Bushin finished its afterlife effect, the clone's chakra used the lightning element to paralyze its victim, causing a strangled cry to tear free from his mouth. The Leaf Junin flipped through another set of hand seals after bursting out of the window from which his clone had come. That day, the renowned ninjutsu of the copy ninja appeared for the 3rd time, filling the air with the sound of chirping birds. Grabbing his right wrist to steady his hand, Kakashi said, "You are talented, but also very arrogant. That in the end is your downfall." The Leaf Junin, having run out of things to say, stooped and hurried into a shushin, his arm raised. Chidori. Stage 4. The Shoten 3 of the 4 Leaf Ninja who were conscious watched in unmasked wonder at the scene in front of them. After lowering his right hand from its extended position, Naruto got up from his crouched position. As the fatigue from the day's events continued to tug at him, a tremor ripped through his body. The effort he had put forth throughout the day caused his comparatively large chakra coils to ache deep within his body. He could actually see the Kawamari that took his place, Sakura. And the effects of the final move would undoubtedly last for days. Nevertheless, the outcome was, to put it mildly, a miracle. To think I could have done it at all. He was a little taken aback himself. I doubted that it would even work. However, he always seemed to perform at his peak under duress. A faint wind brushed over his skin. He inhaled deeply, trying to bring his pounding heart back to normal. In the momentary respite from fighting that his unexpected actions afforded, his cobalt blue eyes started to dart around the area. Over what he saw, a grimace crept into place. The two other members of Genin Squad number 7 were to his right. The only woman on the team was lying on top of another big branch, the same one he had been standing on just before his ninjutsu grabbed her body and made them switch places. She had taken to looking at him with wide green eyes and an open mouth, propped up only by her elbows. For a moment, Naruto thought she resembled a fish that was struggling. The heir of the Uchiha clan was 2 branches away from where she was. Because of the fire ninjutsu he had used minutes earlier, he was exhausted and had fallen to one knee. He was still clutching at his left shoulder. However, in contrast to before, his cold dark brown eyes that had once been blazing Sharingan red had now faded. Despite this, he maintained a remarkably similar expression of surprise, with the main distinction being the absence of a gaping mouth. The blonde's gaze shifted to the left, focusing on a second, larger tree that was almost directly in front of him. The indolent heir of the Nara clan was on a different branch. At this point, the boy had stood up and used the distraction of the blonde's arrival and the final battle to hook the arm of the unconscious body that had been placed on top of him. His expression appeared to be the most composed even though an older leaf genin was half hanging over him. But he still had the same look of disbelief in his eyes as the previous two. At last, Naruto looked entirely to the left, then upward. What could only be described as a miniature Ichibi stood a good distance higher in the canopy. The once priced genin of the sand village had become a mass of roving, moving sand that vaguely resembled an animal. Its unnatural black and golden eyes were fixed on him as it hunched over on all 4 limbs. After using his wind ninjutsu to save the lives of 2 leaf genin, he was met with this. The creature showed no signs of surprise, in contrast to the other 3 young ninja that were hanging around. Rather than that, it fixed the blonde with a scowling expression and a fierce glare. The 2 emotions that were most evident in its gaze were irritation and frustration. It was obvious that its goal in that final attack was to kill Haruno Sakura. It was infuriated to learn that the attempt had not only failed to kill her or her replacement, but also failed to reach her. He blonde didn't mind at all. It is unavoidable. As he met the monster's eyes, Naruto pondered. Before I gained some actual proficiency with this technique, I would have preferred to avoid using any overt demonstration of it. However, I would have completely perished in that final assault without it. It changed from a grimace to a frown. I'll now have to put up with their persistent harassment. Sasuke in particular. Oh no. Of course, Sakura's general lack of usefulness was the only reason he had been placed in this predicament, as usual. In addition, he was angry with himself for hurrying to her aid, in contrast to the Aburame boy she had selected to ruin his academy years. Something that, now that they were ninja, had even persisted. This also applies to the heir of the Nara clan. Nevertheless, without even giving it any thought, he had used more chakra to save their lives. Even though he had talked about not going out of his way to help people who had irritated him for years, it appeared that he had acted without hesitation when the time came. Maybe that revealed something about how strong his character was. Or perhaps it conveyed a message about his lack of determination. In any event, he would need to make amends. How? The ideas of all 4 genin combined were effectively condensed into a single word. Naruto cocked his head, glancing back at the prodigy from the Uchiha clan. The look of surprise had vanished, replaced by a stern expression. His colored eyes had taken on a sharp edge, and his tone had grown harsh. He clearly needed answers, and he wanted them now. Basically, exactly how Naruto anticipated his response. The blonde looked back at the area right in front of him. The results of his labor were stretched out in front of him. With the help of his elemental manipulation, the mass of sand that had been flowing in the direction of the pink-haired leaf kunyachi had been completely stopped. It was replaced by a brilliant riot of color. Before him, the colors pink, blue, red, and green had grown into ragged shapes. Naruto shouted out, "Shoten!" The crystal release. There was the sound of a pin drop. After a beat, the heir of the Uchiha clan repeated, "The crystal release? Shoten?" Naruto forced himself not to sigh. Exactly what I just said. He lifted his left hand and held it out to the glistening structure in front of him. When the smallest amount of chakra was applied, the fixture started to disintegrate and spread out in a dazzling array of pinpricks, like stars dropping out of the sky. He fully rotated his head and fixed the other boy with his dark eyes. It's the same as your Sharingan. This is the limit of my inheritance. The sound of the viper's hiss came from everywhere. As it coiled its long body and crushed buildings, its huge eyes glared down from above the tops of houses, crushing anyone who dared to slow down to avoid the destruction. 4 fangs as long as street lamps and as thin as 2 cows were visible when the mouth opened. The smell of the poison, which dripped in big globs, was enough to render a man unconscious. The Sannin's Jiraiya was unimpressed. Arms crossed, face stern, he stood tall before the scaled menace. The shinobi from all 3 villages dispersed around him in an attempt to avoid the mammoth reptile's deadly range. His brown eyes fixed resolutely on the path of destruction blazed by the raging summon. He looked down at the summon, a sneer spreading across his face. "Let's get to it then," he yelled, something defiant and a little annoyed. The lone figure that was not hurrying out of the way caught the attention of the giant reptilian eyes. It snarled in anger and threw its head high into the air, as though accepting the challenge. Then, when you took into account its size, it struck in a dazzling display of speed that defied logic. It moved far too slowly. Long before the snake had even hit, the Sannin had left the area. At the same moment his body rose, his right thumb rose to his finger. Long before he descended from his jump, he finished a quick nick on a tooth and a flash of hand seals that were too quick for even the most Junin to follow. Before a stream of chakra emerged from deep within his body, he landed in a crouch and slammed his right hand to the ground. The white smoke cloud that denoted the summoning method was so great that it blocked out almost everything in the vicinity. It spread out in a plume and traveled down alleys and over buildings. Many of them were energy. Sensitive shivered at the sheer density of the life energy, and shinobi from all factions were forced to halt and cover their faces as the cloud infused with chakra swept over them. The whole place was rocked for a half-second by a loud boom, and then the fog was blown away by a strong wind. Wide-eyed ninja from all 3 villages watched the scene that met their eyes. In the center of the battlefield, a gigantic toad that was at least 2 houses tall and almost 3 times as heavy had materialized. The remains of the similarly large viper, whose head had been crushed to a bloody pulp by the sheer size of the object that had fallen on it, were found beneath its feet. Before hunching over even more, the toad let out a deep, thrumming croak. As the viper finally dispelled in death, the summon cleared the rooftops with a single push of its powerful legs and set out to find its next victim. Before focusing on a nearby building, Jiraiya watched his toad companion take off. He held up a hand and gestured to his place. Before a lone Black Ops agent flashed through the air in a body flicker, a window was blown open from the inside the next instant. In front of the taller man, the lone Anbu emerged from transition and bowed his head to greet the fabled toad sage. "Honorable Jiraiya. Sama." The smaller shinobi caught the man's attention. "I have something of grave importance for you. It's vital to the village's survival." The man moved but remained silent. The Sannin went on. "The enemy has a Jinchuriki. The Tsunade genin from the final portion of the exam. I know you've probably never had to use the required techniques for suppressing the energy of a Biju before, but we don't have many options at this point. I'll follow up on you as soon as I'm done with the snake problem. If you can't stop it, just try to hold it off." His request was met with a simple nod. "Also be on the lookout for several leaf genin. Among them are Uzumaki Naruto and Uchiha Sasuke. I don't think I need to tell you that they have to survive this day. You'll need to evacuate them out of the surrounding forest if it looks like you'll be unable to stop the Ichibi." The man nodded again, and his back went straight and rigid. Jiraiya gave him another glance before nodding in what appeared to be approval. Without saying anything more, the Black Ops agent fled once more, this time toward a nearby gap in the village's defenses. Before his body flickered out of the area and after his summons, the Sannin stood there for a single moment, unconcerned about any attempt on his life. For the time being, he had done everything he could. Repelling this invasion was the responsibility of the village's other young shinobi. "What do you mean you're Keke Genkai?" The statement was not so much a question as a demand. Before returning his focus to the immediate threat in the area, Naruto glanced back at the other boy, who appeared unconcerned by his change in attitude. As the Sand Jinchuriki moved on his post above their heads, he lowered his hand and watched. He continued to stare at the Tsunade genin and said, "You know exactly what it means. You've always bragged about your own after all." He tugged at the left corner of his mouth. "Don't tell me you're upset. Or did you honestly believe that you would be the only one of us to be gifted through blood?" The other boy seemed agitated by that. However, the sand monster appeared to have reached its limit of patience before he could react or say anything. 2 complete seconds before the monster appeared to move, the only indication they got was the slight tensing of the body. It took off from its perch with the swiftness of a diving sparrow. The right claw had retracted, ready to take life, and a howl of anger swept through the area. Like a wave onto a beach, a wave of vile chakra and killer intent swept over them. The sensation made the three oblivious Leaf Genin go rigid, and all they could do was watch the attack's speed and sheer intensity. Naruto had everything he needed. He disappeared in a skid across the length of another branch, long before his sand counterpart had arrived at his former position. The sand monster did not let the evasion have any effect on him. Immediately after the dive, the blonde fled in the direction of a wave of the left arm. Before changing into a wave of sand shuriken, a slice of sand flowed free. As he stumbled onto his underside to escape the sandstorm, Naruto bit his bottom lip in exasperation. For the second time, he sidestepped the descending sand shinobi and leapt back up. Before thrusting his hands at his sand adversary, the blonde bit his lip more tightly and sped through a quick line of seals, drawing up some of his remaining chakra. Fuden. Daitopa, Great Breakthrough, Wind Release. The raging Jinchuriki was struck squarely by the wind chakra wave, which was only able to knock it back a short distance. With a little hop in his step, the blonde used this to put some distance between them. Before the monster genin hunched over on all four, a deep growl echoed from somewhere in its body. Naruto watched in shock as the sand genin started rapidly sucking wind into his body, causing the sand-based body to swell at the air intake. Oh, you must be joking with me. Like the peeling of an orange's skin, the wind release technique's pure kinetic force tore the bark off every tree in its path. As soon as he sensed the chakra building up, Naruto leapt sideways and left the area just in time. In his mid-air transition, he observed the Tsunade Jinchuriki's technique's sheer power. If that had struck me, as he landed against the trunk of another tree, clinging to it with chakra only out of instinct, the blonde thought. Before four shurikens struck its exposed back, the sand creature twisted its head to follow him for a split second. Unfazed by the jagged stars, the creature quickly spun around to face the direction from which the attack had come, a growl of annoyance rumbling from deep within. With her arm still out from the throw, Sakura froze the moment its eyes met hers. She stared clumsily. Naruto merely sighed, a fool. Before abruptly stooping forward and leaning its body against the branch beneath it, the Tsunade weapon gave a low, heavy growl. The creature appeared to curl up in a ball of roving sand in front of Naruto and the Leaf Genin. Before a thunderous bark erupted and shook them to their very core, they watched as the swirling mass of sand coiled tighter and tighter. The mass of sand abruptly stopped moving, then bubbled up like boiling water, and Blue Eyes narrowed. This is not going to be to my liking. With total assurance, he thought. I am absolutely certain that I will detest this. It was the final thought he was able to expel before the bubbling mass abruptly erupted into a sandstorm that swept out in all directions. Regardless of the faction they represented, everyone in the Leaf Village felt the weight of the tension that suddenly changed the atmosphere. The streets felt a kind of pressure that was almost palpable. It pressed down on the people like an approaching wave and clung to the skin like the electrical charge in an approaching storm. Then, in the distance, there was a huge boom that shook the streets and reached all the way to the center of the enormous shinobi village. Without warning, a wave of dark and repulsive chakra swept across the world. Like a small animal facing a larger predator, everyone paused and took notice of the sudden onslaught of wrong. Given what was about to happen, physical altercations were abruptly put on hold and hands stopped mid-sign, seal. Jiraiya was aware of it long before most people had even considered it. A tremendous roar shook buildings to their foundations and reverberated from beyond the village walls. In time to witness a children's story nightmare play out in front of them, the entire village turned to face the direction of origin. With a loud boom, the sand-made Biju slammed down after reaching one big paw high into the sky. As its shape started to block out the rays of the now setting sun, its wide, open mouth gaped. As the newly created creature remounted on its haunches and roared its fury out into the world, great shoulders rose in the sky. Shinobi from both Suna and Ado were aware of the plan well in advance, but they were unable to do anything but stand and gaze at the massive monster that had been let loose on the world, just like the residents of the Leaf Village. Suddenly, like a hot air current, a tangible sense of fear had risen. As people gathered to watch what lay ahead, battles had been entirely forgotten. As it landed on its front paws, the Ichibi let out another roar. Its black and yellow eyes move from one side of the globe to the other while it observes what is going on in its surroundings. To everyone's abrupt surprise, its maw then peeled back to show a row of incredibly sharp teeth before. It started to laugh, and then that turned into full-fledged laughter. The creature of chakra and sand started to roar out a crazy kind of laugh, and the toad sage cringed along with most of the village. It was a sound that made him think of someone who lived in an asylum. But more sinister, darker. As the force and intensity increased, the hair stood on end and the skin crawled. At his side, the big man felt his hands clench into fists. It is insane. As he gazed upon the first of the great, tailed beasts, he thought in horror. In the head, it is absolutely insane. Naturally, he had heard the tales. Stories about how Suna had decided to intentionally leave the seal for their Jinchuriki flawed for decades in order to allow more power to be released at any time. He had been told that since the invention of the Jinchuriki, every Ichibi host had experienced episodes of insomnia, and that the residents of the Sand Village had generally learned to avoid the chosen shinobi out of concern for potential danger. Despite his youth, he had also heard that the current host was the most powerful one to date, that the fourth Kage's youngest son was a born talent who had absorbed the creature while still in his mother's womb, and that he had become the most prominent illustration of what could and would go wrong with one of the human sacrifices, in return for the enormous power boost that came with being a Jinchuriki. However, no amount of knowledge could prepare a man for the sight of a Biju in its actual and horrible form. Even the great Toad Sage had his stomach turned by the sight of the group's alleged sadistic member. I must make my way over there. With dismay, the elderly Leaf Shinobi pondered. Perhaps those children are still alive. Freedom. The already motionless Leaf Village came to a complete halt at the sound of the single word. People's eyes widened, if at all, and they gaped at the scene once more. Jiraiya had halted in the middle of his stride to concentrate on the creature that was perched far above the treetops. "I'm free," was said with a hint of malice mingled with happiness. The air and the ground, so fun. Some stepped back, realizing they were hearing things right, as a fresh wave of crazed laughter broke out. That it was the human language that the creature in front of them was using. So much to do, so much to see. Though the trees were almost uprooted as a result, the big chest suddenly puffed up with air before releasing what sounded like a contented sigh. There was a sly smile on the maw. So much to kill. As the enormous creature turned its enormous head in the direction of the actual village, the Toad Sage felt his stomach turn. The grin became even more vicious as the big yellow eyes narrowed. The sudden surge of murderous intent was so intense that it caused the Sannin to retreat. He was certain that during the 5 seconds, a significant number of people had committed suicide in order to avoid the consequences, not to mention those who perished because their hearts couldn't bear it. The ground trembled behind the imposing beast as it took a single step toward the village. In a sudden realization, it said, "I'll start over here first. There's a lot of humans to kill here." As those around him started to flee in the other direction, Jiraiya took a step forward and bit his bottom lip hard enough to extract blood. Before launching himself into the air like a spring and landing on a nearby building for a high vantage point, his strong legs curled. In one quick motion, his right thumb rose and snatched some of his life essence away. As he got ready to start a chain of seals in anticipation of the impending battle, his large, meaty hands slapped together. I must call forth Gamabunta, however, as he completed the final seal and grasped his wrist to complete the summoning technique. His keen senses detected the spike of another vile chakra flare just beneath the first. It was insignificant in comparison to the Ichibi's overwhelming force, and for a moment he believed he was dreaming. However, the enormous, sand-like creature halted in the middle of its stride and then turned its head in confusion toward the area it had just left. Hey! Another pulse arose, stronger than the first, and Jiraiya's heart jumped in his throat. The Suna demon placed its foot down and then fully rotated its body to face its previous position. Just in time, a cloud of smoke arose, stretching far above the treetops and high into the sky. Jiraiya dropped his hands and watched, along with many others, as a new creature appeared on this realm of existence due to the summoning jutsu. Despite the dire circumstances, a broad smile spread across his face. Naruto. A huge growl that sounded more like a malfunctioning machine than a living thing pierced the fog and reached the sky as the smoke started to dissipate. The Ichibi took a position against its newest adversary, squinting its eyes and crouching on its haunches. A huge, scaled claw swung out from the cloud and hit the ground hard. The reptilian figure drew itself into view, and Jiraiya watched. Undoubtedly, it was the biggest lizard he had ever seen. It hunched closer to the ground and was long. With every swing, a thick, veiny tail swished from side to side, uprooting trees in its wake. Globs of viscous saliva dropped out of its mouth and onto the forest below as its gaping maw opened. Its squat body was supported by thick limbs, and it snarled deeply as it slit, like pupils fixed on the raccoon dog in front of it. The sand creature turned to face the summon, and then it let out a rumbling laugh. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" The lizard-like creature hissed low in response, before the skin on either side of its head separated and revealed a hood the color of flesh. Jiraiya blinked at the odd sight, feeling his smile slide away. How on earth is that thing? His entire body hurt. His clothes were torn in too many places to count, and his headache had long since turned into a full-blown migraine. It was difficult for him to breathe, and he was much more exhausted than he had ever been. As his overworked chakra coils tried to sustain the corrosive force of the nine-tailed fox pumping through his body, tremors of fire shook through his body. But he remained erect in spite of everything. Across the forest, the blonde glared at the massive figure in front of him with his now bright red eyes. The renowned leaf village trees were tall, but the Ichibi stood well above them. Its black and yellow eyes were brimming with ill will and revealed the hatred that lingered deep within the beast. In an ever-moving sea of gold, sand continuously brushed over its form. As it shifted its weight back onto its hind legs, paws with horse-sized claws scratched at the dirt. Something like a mountain-sized monster. A creature from folklore and children's books. If it wasn't attempting to murder him, it would be a spectacular sight. I asked you a question, or so obnoxious. The genin grimaced as he thought. Naruto looked down at the summon he was standing over and said, "Well, Shirai. How's this for a dire situation and a worthy foe?" Beneath his feet, the enormous reptile raised its two big red eyes to gaze at him. The boy's body rumbled with a deep growl that came from the pit of its chest. Despite the menacing sound, Naruto looked down without admiration. To the proud creature he had brought to the battlefield, he extended his arms akimbo. A direct descendant of the dragons who had once dominated the entire planet in antiquity, the drake was a monster unto itself. Tightly packed muscles under a leathery hide make it sinuous and lethal. As it inhaled deeply, the black beast with the two neon blue stripes down either side of its body stooped even more. The genin yelled, gesturing to the Biju across from them, "What? I told you guys I got into quite a bit of trouble. It's a key part of my charm." As the summon rolled its eyes down to the enemy in front of it, the pink tongue, which was almost tree-length, crept out to taste the air. The Ichibi had not even shifted from its spot, preferring to give the newest diversion from its amusement a vile glare. Despite the width of each ivory spear, the drake's mouth opened to reveal two rows of dagger-shaped teeth with needle-fine tips. The summoner Shirai's deep voice rumbled back, "A worthy foe indeed, and such a strange creature to say the least." At the answer, Naruto arched an eyebrow before a tiny smile split his face. "You have no idea who that is, huh?" The blonde caught the summon's attention again. Naruto's smile widened even more. He told the large reptile, "That's the Ichibi, one of the 9 Biju." His declaration was carried by the wind like a broken string kite. After 3 full seconds of silence, the summon asked, "The Ichibi? A Biju?" Naruto responded with a slow nod. The great sand creature glared back at the summon as his eyes snapped back down. A deep hissing sound escaped the drake's lips after another moment of silence. The blonde didn't recognize the sound for a laugh of mirth for a second longer than he should have. "A far more worthy foe than I originally could have ever received. You are indeed in your rights to call for me." The blonde shrugged, and his smile dimmed. "Well, I figured it would be wrong to summon your older brother or father. You should get first dibs after all." He heard a resounding of agreement. "Plus your brother is kind of a dick." One more sigh of agreement. "Hey, stop ignoring me." Naruto scowled. Gods, but he was a pain in the neck. The Ichibi shouted, "You know what, as it repositioned its weight. I don't care who you are anymore. I'm just gonna kill you now." As he crouched even closer to the hide of his summon, the blonde muttered, "Well, at least he was straightforward with it." The blonde took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and concentrated as hard as he could to extract a little more of the 9-tailed fox's chakra through the tiny hole the overlapping seal had made for him. The genin gathered the destructive and wild energy and forced it to spread throughout his abused chakra coils, choking back the gasp of pain that was about to burst from his mouth. "Don't let this kill me, please." Nearly instantaneous changes occurred in every area that the chakra touched. His hand and foot nails started to grow longer and take the shape of claws, and his facial whisker, like birthmarks, started to darken and spread. The slight and unexpected growth was preceded by a deep burning sensation in his muscles and a dull ache in his gums, which indicated the formation of fangs. The world around him was suddenly flooded with color and sounds, so the blonde shrugged his migraine away as best he could, forcing his eyes, which now had cat-like pupils, to open. His migraine almost doubled in intensity as his senses started to overburden the Kyuubi's dark chakra with vivid sights and rich scents. But the boy persisted in spite of everything. "One more fight. After one more, I'll be able to relax, hopefully." The Ichibi leaned forward and started to suck a huge amount of air into its gullet, but a warning growl brought him back to the present in time to concentrate on the task at hand. When he realized it was the beginning of a ninjutsu, The blonde grimaced and started to form his own hand seals in anticipation of a counterattack. As soon as the first Biju remounted on its hind legs, Naruto yelled, "You ready, Shirai?" The summon opened the two skin flaps close to its neck and snorted as it stooped lower to the ground. Does it matter? As he incorporated the Kyuubi's potent chakra into his own wind. Natured attack, Naruto said. Nope. With a slight smile. Just thought I'd ask for the sake of politeness. Despite the many scratches and wounds on his body, Sarutobi said, smiling softly, a marvelous sight. Wouldn't you agree? The question caused the Sannin to grit his teeth. As he gazed out into the forest around the Leaf Village, where the two titanic creatures had started fighting, a hiss of annoyance filled the now quiet rooftop. The traitor snake summoner clenched his fist in frustration as he stood behind the first and second Hokage. He had no intention of the Ichibi's appearance unfolding in this manner. What is that? He asked, sounding more like a demand than a query. Sarutobi's smile merely widened slightly. The Sandame replied, matter of factly, a summon of course, or at least that's what I'd like to believe given the giant cloud of smoke that preluded its appearance. I've never seen anything like that before. What is it? The older man shrugged his shoulders casually and said, no clue. I didn't bother to ask the summoner for a name. Rather fascinating creature though. Looks like a lizard but is, as you can see, far more useful than your normal reptile. Before the skin flaps on its head glowed a brilliant blue and a lightning ninjutsu blasted forward in a sharp bolt. The entire village was treated to the sight of the reptile in question abruptly slithering to the side with a powerful push of its legs. The force with which it exploded on the Ichibi's side caused a crack of thunder to fill the air. However, aside from momentarily knocking the Biju off guard, the attack appeared to have no effect because the constantly flowing sand that made up the beast's body swiftly covered the small amount of damage. I don't think it will actually manage to beat the Biju, given the size and power difference, the Hokage said, but I dare say it will more than do to hold it off until Jiraiya or one of the other countermeasures can get into place. The elderly man returned his focus to his former pupil, which means your little trump card will fall long before it breaches the village walls. Orochimaru's eyes locked with his former instructor before he let out another frustrated hiss. A sly grin split his face as he said, not if I go out there and kill everyone personally. Or perhaps I'll just use Manda to kill everyone in this forsaken village? Despite the direct danger to his village, Sarutobi calmly retorted, that implies you'll be leaving this roof alive. To punctuate his statement, the Hokage gripped his own summon, turned staff tightly and slammed it down on the roof. But we both know that won't be happening. Orochimaru growled, you're rather confident for a fossil well past his prime. I'm going to savor the last few moments of your life, Sarutobi. Sensei. The Hokage gave a snort. You've been declaring your intention to kill me for well over an hour now, but so far all you've done is hide behind my two former teachers like the little coward that you are. When will you ever get it through your thick skull? You can't beat me, boy. The snake Sannin appeared to be agitated by that. The pale shinobi sped past his silent sentries and cut the distance between them in half in 2 seconds. More than prepared, Sarutobi took a deep breath, made a half seal with his left hand, and stepped forward forcefully. Fire release. Fire dragon projectile. Kaden. Karyu Enden. Like a river rushing down a hill, the steam of fire swept across the vast area. Orochimaru simply swerved to the left and out of the path, without pausing for a second in his progress. Less than 2 steps from his former teacher, the Sannin exploded forward into another gear before abruptly stopping. Before launching a heel kick with his left foot aimed at the Hokage's head, Orochimaru spun tightly to his right. A simple body flicker brought Sarutobi within range to swing his weapon forward like a bat, but he didn't bat an eye, just adjusting his staff to intercept the offending limb. With superhuman speed, Orochimaru drew his leg back and lowered himself into a crouch, then swept his right foot across the floor while balancing on 2 hands. Sarutobi shifted his hold on his staff and brought it down quickly in the direction of the Sannin's skull, hopping nimbly. As the force of the staff's impact cracked the rooftop tiles beneath their feet, the Sannin escaped that as well, spiraling off to the right like a sidewinder. The Sannin stood up with a single fluid motion and then pushed his head forward. The blade extended beyond reasonable doubt, and the Hokage leaned sideways to avoid it, biting his lip in a grimace. The Kusunagi sword. The blade retracted, and Sarutobi grimaced as he took a quick step back. To be honest, I had forgotten. Disgusted, the old Hokage watched as the Sannin recited the renowned sword's hilt and then practiced swinging it a few times. Orochimaru twirled the blade in a circle with a flick of his right wrist, taunting, "You've certainly remained quick in your old age, Sarutobi. Sensei. I expected to have skewered you through by now." Hiruzen snorted back, happy to disappoint. I see you still have that blade in your possession. Such a shame. The long-haired shinobi slid his right foot back and lowered himself into a shallow crouch, asking, "Oh, worried, I would be too." Hiruzen eyed the Jien the Sannin had moved over his head and shook his head in response, saying, disappointed. Such a beautiful blade is wasted on someone like you. Only a menacing smile could appear on the Sannin's face. Funny, I said the same thing about this excuse of a village many times before. Until I learned better, that is. The Hokage simply raised the fingers of his left hand to his lips in response, but he didn't say anything else. Fuden. Shinku Gyoku, vacuum sphere for wind release. 3 bullets of wind chakra crashed into the spot where the Sannin had been standing, causing him to quickly retreat. Orochimaru dodged his former teacher's ninjutsu attack with astonishing agility, running from side to side. With a grimace, Sarutobi dropped his hand to shift his staff into a defensive position as the snake Sannin closed in on him once more. His strength and youth are being used against me. In order to block the descending slash, the elderly shinobi raised his staff and spread his legs into a stronger base. Even he lacks the conceit to engage me in a full-on ninjutsu duel. Even though it was annoying to acknowledge, a part of the Sandaime was somewhat impressed by the logic of his former student. Orochimaru, who was a shinobi prodigy in his youth, was similar in that he chose to concentrate on a weakness that he could use rather than using more ostentatious techniques like other people were prone to. A part of him was pleasantly surprised that the man had absorbed at least some of his lessons. That he would even think of being proud repulsed the other part. Sarutobi kicked forward, knocking the snake summoner away and giving him some space as he leaned back to let the Sannin press in even more. A fireball exploded into the gap between them after another half-seal. As the Sannin swept his sword through the flames, Sarutobi's body flickered away. Before launching his own shushin to pursue, the Sannin hissed in laughter. Slamming his staff down, Sarutobi yelled, "Enma," and started to dash through a chain of seals. "Right," snarled the summon. Turned staff, which sprang 2 arms on either side to halt the Sannin's cold advance. With a furrowed brow, Orochimaru watched as the Monkey King seized each arm by the wrist while a tail coiled itself tightly around his neck. The summon's face spouted on the surface of the staff, declaring, "I'm going to tear you into 2 pieces, you little shit. Like we should have done years ago." Orochimaru eyed his sensei out of the corner of his right eye and gave the best snort he could. He tilted his head back just in time to see the Hokage finish his chain of seals, then let his sword drop tip first onto the rooftop with a sneer of annoyance. To set up the right angle for his next move, Sarutobi took a big hop to the side and then a quick hop back. Raiden. Gion, false darkness, lighting release. With the force of a cannon, the lightning style technique shot out of the Hokage's mouth and raced across the gap between them. With a growl, Orochimaru parted his lips and made half-seals with both hands. When 2 hands reached the corners of the snake Sannin's mouth and then pushed outward, Enma could only watch in shock and disgust. A fresh Orochimaru emerged from his suspended body with a single, chakra-infused pull, resembling a snake shedding its skin. "What?" was the Hokage's only response as he blinked the lightning ninjutsu's bright dots out of his eyes. He watched with wide eyes as his now slime-covered student slithered away from his devoted summons, avoiding his ninjutsu completely as it struck his now useless body, and spiraled onto the ground. Orochimaru laughed with delight as he moved away from Enma, enjoying the startled looks of his 2 fighters. The snake summoner got up and scoffed, "Come now, sensei, did you really think it would be that easy?" After gathering his thoughts, Sarutobi shook his head in dismay. His tone showed his disgust. "What have you done to yourself, you stupid child?" Orochimaru smiled. "I've become better than you ever were, old fool." The Ichibi's enormous wind ninjutsu threw Naruto's summon backwards, but he clung on for dear life. As the enormous reptile's form smashed through the fabled forest, Shirai grunted as his sharp claws dug into the ground to try to slow down the backward momentum, uprooting trees and kicking up dirt. When the summon finally came to a halt, the blonde's form echoed with the drake's deep growl. With his clothing and skin ripped in many places from the aftermath of the violent wind technique, Naruto gasped as he struggled to stand up. Having been the direct target of many of the attacks, he was certain without a glance that his summon was in as much, if not more, trouble than he was. In a bland voice, the blonde declared, "This isn't going well." The silence that followed his call was more than sufficient. "Furthermore, I'm essentially worthless here." Naruto grimaced as he thought. "I don't have a lot of ninjutsu skills, and it's been a pain to turn the Kyuubi's chakra into something useful." The blonde actually knew he was going to get into a lot of trouble when he first used the summoning technique. However, The young shinobi had little choice because the Ichibi's appearance had essentially crushed him and his fellow Leaf Genin beneath the unexpected mass of expanding sand. Nevertheless, when he bit his right thumb, the battle was going exactly as he had imagined. Shirai and Naruto were at a significant disadvantage. Even though Shirai was an exceptionally large summon, the two still lacked size in comparison to the Biju they were currently up against. Furthermore, Naruto could see that the constantly moving sand behaved much like it did when the Biju was imprisoned inside its host, easily wiping out any harm the two had actually managed to cause. Furthermore, there was no genuine practice between Naruto and the summon, so they couldn't be relied upon to be even somewhat in sync. At this point, the blonde's only accomplishment was to use his single mass and ninjutsu to counter some of the Ichibi's own attacks. That's the only reason the two hadn't already been swept under and trampled under by the sand. As the Drake observed their opponent, which had begun to hop up and down in apparent excitement, it asked sternly, "Any ideas? Because I'm out of tricks here." No, however, Naruto was never going to acknowledge that, maybe, thinking on something. Where on earth was the backup that Kakashi had promised? There's a voice in the blonde's head warning against depending on someone else to save you. He promised to stand as tall as he could on his own strength going forward, didn't he? The person who had been sent to help him might be lying dead somewhere along the way, for all he knew. He might have been sliced to pieces by one of the Ichibi's enormous wind ninjutsu, which he appeared to be able to call forth at will, or he might have been smashed by the summon while attempting to avoid an earlier attack. "I'm on my own in any case." The Drake yelled, "Heads up," before it jumped to the right. The sudden evasion caused Naruto's stomach to rise and fall, so he gritted his teeth and used chakra to anchor himself tightly to the summon. The space they had occupied had been torn apart by a surge of sand that rushed past with the force of a geyser rising from the earth, reaching high into the sky. The force uprooted some of the proud trees, and the blonde winced. If the other Leaf Genin were still alive, they should have left the area long ago. Naruto snorted almost immediately after the thought crossed his mind. Aside from the cowardly Nara, none of them could possibly have the foresight to leave a clearly hostile area. It is impossible that Uchiha did not stay. The Ichibi gave a gleeful laugh. Fun, fu yun. The mad Biju started to stomp around with pleasure as the summon snarled once more. Even Naruto clenched his jaw in exasperation. There was nothing we could do to stop the toy monster from playing with us. That dumb sand kid just sleeps his way through everything in the meantime. As soon as the words left his mind, they were cut off. Dozing off. Through everything. The blonde literally yelled, "That's it," and raised his hands in the air. "What?" asked the summons immediately. "What do you see?" "The Tsunade Jinchuriki," Naruto exclaimed, advancing forcefully and gesturing to the massive sand monster. "The other boy like me. He's on the damn thing's back." The summon's sharp eyes focused on the human half, submerged from the Biju's back as it shot a glance in the direction the boy was pointing. "What about the human?" "He's sleeping." But it was noted earlier that all of the Tsunade Jinchurikis so far have insomnia because of incomplete seals. Naruto quickly clarified. "This is why. If he sleeps it comes out. So he must be forbidden from doing so." As it started to make connections as well, the summon rumbled and flicked its tongue. A technique that forces sleep. Naruto said, "I was worried about trying to kill him before. However, just because the Kyuubi would die with him did not mean that all other Biju had the same limitations. As hard as that would have been to manage with him already half a monster by the time I came along, I was also worried that killing him would set the Ichibi free. He wouldn't be shocked to learn that the Biju deliberately made the boy a target for that reason." "But you don't have to worry about that," Shirai completed, half snarling. "If you could just wake him up." Naruto clapped and said, "Then I'm sure that damn thing will fall apart. That technique was probably made specifically for something like this invasion. But it wouldn't do to have that crazy Jinchuriki use it against his own village at will." Shirai gave one head bob. "It has to have a fail-safe for overriding it. And when in doubt, punch someone." The summon's maws reformed into a smile. "Like shape. That probably works too." Right. Now the only question was how to wake him up. And they were in dire need of an answer to that weighty question. All of the harm done to the massive creature had so far been ineffective. Furthermore, the monster itself was far faster and far more powerful than they had first thought. So how would you approach a sand-based creature that had the ability to manipulate sand? Not to mention reach a comparatively tiny area on its body to awaken the murderous child affixed to it. They both came up with the same problematic response. The Drake gave a low growl and said, "Naruto, get ready." The blonde didn't need to inquire about the summon's plans. Rather, he just closed his eyes and knelt down on the reptilian's head. directed the Nine Tails corrosive chakra toward his lower body. This would be his only chance. Jiraiya would have to dispel the summon as soon as he completed his part in order to survive, and his life would be in jeopardy. This implied that Naruto would be abandoned and unable to call for assistance again in the event of an emergency. He couldn't summon enough chakra from his body to call forth Jiraiya's father or brother. Long before he could complete the hand seals, the effort would kill him. The blonde leaf genin said softly, but his voice could still be heard clearly, "I'm ready." Before pointing its body at the now approaching Ichibi, the summon moved to paw at the ground. With a force akin to a huge explosion, it slammed its enormous tail into the ground once. Despite flinching at the sound, Naruto held his ground and was prepared to move at any time. The drake's massive muscles tensed beneath its scaly hide as it rumbled, "Naruto, if this works, you owe me a drink." The blonde blinked. "And just to let you know in advance, I need several barrels of the stuff." Naruto snapped his mouth shut after opening it once. He shook his head and then let out a deep sigh. "I'll steal it from the damn distillery if I have to." The summon scratched at the ground like a bull, growling in a strange sound that sounded like a chuckle. Naruto took a deep breath and let it out gradually. They took off a half-second later, with Jiraiya moving across the ground at almost twice the speed he had displayed thus far. His unexpected run was so swift that the Ichibi froze, its big yellow and black eyes blinking in shock. With the force of a dozen freight trains, the drake crashed into the Biju. A thud that sounded more like a thunderclap echoed past the village, and the impact was so powerful that the ground splintered in all directions for more than a mile. The Ichibi yelled, taken utterly by surprise as the smaller creature pushed its body back with such force that it almost fell over. Jiraiya exclaimed, "Naruto," as the drake extended both of its claws to seize the animal. Now. Its demand was unnecessary for the summon. Shortly before the collision, Naruto had jumped, his body flickering forward and onto the back of the Biju before transforming into a burst of red chakra. The blonde landed on one knee, but his head snapped up to find his target before the chakra of the Nine Tails prevented him from instinctively sinking down. The unconscious body of the youngest son of the Kazekage sat there, about 20 meters from him, with his arms drooping at his sides. When he heard the big pop of his summon dispelling, the blonde genin stood up and rushed forward in a single fluid motion. The sand that made up the Biju's body started to rise up in reaction to the unexpected threat, and red eyes darted everywhere. In an attempt to drag him down, a tendril of something tangled itself around his right ankle and shot forward like a viper. "No." The blonde growled as a third grabbed for his waist and a third wrapped around the thigh of his opposing leg. "No, damn it." This was not where he was going to die. The blonde unleashed the strongest shushin of his youth after channeling the last of the Nine Tails chakra down to his legs with a roar of rage. With the face of a snarling fox, the flame-like chakra rushed forward and violently tore the sand from his body. In a blur of sheer speed, the blonde left, almost giving him whiplash and dizziness. The leaf genin stopped within arm's length of his target in less than 2 full seconds, with his right fist already drawn back behind his head. Even though the sand was trying to drag him under, the blonde screamed in desperation, "Wake up, damn it," as his arm shot forward in a textbook haymaker. The boy's hand broke under the force of the blow, which landed with a heavy thud. Spittle flew from Sabuka no Gaara's mouth as his eyes were forced open, and his head was violently snapped to the side. The sand nin's jaw split open in a fissure, and a strangled cry of agony escaped his lips. The Ichibi cried out, "No," as it felt its link to the outside world being violently severed. "I just came out to place." Indeed. The blonde thought triumphantly as the Biju's stifling chakra was torn away just as suddenly as it had appeared. The genin felt a surge of excitement as the sand that had encircled him started to relax. The blonde forced himself back out of the unexpected hole he had been drawn into by pulling on his weary leg muscles. Apparently his gambit had worked. What? The sand genin swung his head back around, his eyes wild as he tried to catch up with the current events, barely managing with his mangled jaw. Green was startled and fixed his attention on the smiling blonde half that was buried in sand in front of him. "You." When the other Jinchuriki gestured for the sand around him to come back to life, Naruto stiffened. Desperation and rage erupted in torrents. This bitch was not going to use a last-minute heave to ruin his well-earned victory. "Shut the fuck up," the genin yelled as he swung his other hand around to deliver another blow. The sand ninja's focus was disrupted when this one also landed home and knocked his head back in the opposite direction. As the sand ninja collapsed back into his own sandhole, conscious but unable to rise again, the smile came back to life. At the sight of his defeated opponent, joy returned to his body. The taste was sweet, and there was a sense of victory. At that moment, Everything in the world was fine. The boy didn't even bother to look because he was certain that the village battle was coming to a close and that the invaders would soon be leaving with their tails between their legs. He was aware that the Ichibi and Orochimaru's scheme to destroy the leaves would coincide on this day. He would do everything in his power to help bring this victory to fruition. Nothing. Aside from the fact that, without the Biju's chakra to keep it together in a physical form, the enormous sand creature was starting to disintegrate quickly beneath his feet. The blonde deadpanned as he felt himself sink beneath the sea of gold, his vision going black as he passed out. Aw shit. He would be unlucky to pass away at a time when things were beginning to improve. Screw life. I don't need to tell you the kind of trouble that we are in. Instead of responding to the conversation prompt, Jiraiya chose to keep gazing out over the village that twisted beneath them. He could see the long line of black-clad people from his place high in the renowned tower in the Hokage's office. One by one, they cautiously shuffled along, some of them sobbing openly. On this somber and rainy day, the entire village, young and old, had come out to honor the great man who had guided them for so long. The toad sage felt his eyes pan up toward the overcast morning skies with reluctance. The torrential rain that pelted the destroyed village was both symbolic and infuriating. For the Sandaime Hokage, even the heavens wept. Despite the man's silence, Koharu went on, although Otto and Suna were forced away. And Orochimaru made to flee like the coward that he really is, we still have to be on our guard. This may be an opportunity that one of the other villages could take without warning. Homura muttered aloud, not to mention the fact that either of our current adversaries could be regrouping as we speak. It would be foolish of us to just assume that they would give up after making such a bold move in the first place. The Sannin rose from his position leaning against a nearby window's glass and faced the other two people who were in his former teacher's office. Both of Sandaime's now deceased teammates gazed back at the man's lone trustworthy pupil. The normally vivacious Toad Sage's gaunt appearance revealed the profound impact his sensei's death had had on him. As he strode toward the two village elders, the shinobi remained upright. Jiraiya pulled his mentor's chair out from behind the old oak desk and sat down huffily, asking, "Has there been any news on the Ichibi kid?" The elderly woman gave a headshake. "None. He was apparently spirited away before our operative could arrive on the scene. Not that it would have mattered much anyway. The first priority after the Ichibi was disabled was to find Uzumaki before moving on for the other young genin in the area. There wouldn't have been enough time for one shinobi to accomplish all of that and restrain the Suna Jinchuriki, no matter how weak the boy had become." Jiraiya gave a grunt that was a mixture of agreement and frustration. She was correct. Even so, it irritated them to know that the forces behind the unsuccessful invasion force of Orochimaru and the Suna Jinchurikia had both gotten away with it once things started to go their way. In many ways, it made the entire day seem pointless. Homura ordered, "We have to take control of the situation. Break things down piece by piece and prepare contingency plans." The Sannin sighed and said, "I agree. So where do we begin?" "The daimyo," was Koharu's immediate response. "His presence in the village is an unforeseen obstacle." Hamaru gave a nod of agreement. "It's been a week now since the invasion and he's shown no signs of returning to the capital." The Sannin snorted. The answer was simple, because he's waiting, and you both know why. Hamaru appeared uncertain. "I'm not sure it's a good idea to let Uzumaki so close to him." Halfway up his forehead, Jiraiya felt his left eyebrow lift, scared Naruto might lose control. The retired shinobi fixed it, saying, "No, scared the daimyo wants him removed from the village." Koharu scowled at the mere notion. She had a legitimate question. "Do you honestly think he would pull something like that? It's been years already and he's shown no sign of interest before." Jiraiya added bluntly, "Naruto never showed any real talent before. In the span of one day alone the entire village's perception of him has changed drastically by the standards of the actual shinobi who participated in the village's defense. Indeed, the people who had been fighting on the streets of the village were talking a lot about his unexpected influence. Just hours before the attack, many of the same people were complaining about his very existence, and now they were sharing stories of their short bouts with him. In a situation that should have been well beyond his comprehension, let alone one in which he actively participated, the boy had done far more than any other genin. Jiraiya believed it spoke as much about the genin himself as it did about the man who had instructed the boy. What good would removing the boy from the village do anyway? Hamaru thought. As it stands, having him in our hands is the best thing we can do for all of Fire Country right now. Where would he put the boy? He might simply want him taken away, Koharu muttered. Perhaps the boy's performance in the exams have him afraid. The hard-eyed Jiraiya looked at her. "I don't think he's really as afraid of Naruto as you seem to believe." The older woman shrugged her shoulders and asked, "Why not?" Despite the boy's current position, there are still those who know exactly who he is and what he represents. Is it really so out of the realm of possibilities to think that the daimyo wants to remove any obstacles from his path? The Sannin said bluntly, Naruto has no desire to be put in line. He doesn't really want to be Hokage anymore, let alone rule all of Fire Country. Cleanly, she retorted, and the man knows that? After all, he's never even spoken to the boy before. Homura scowled. The retired shinobi shifted in his seat and said, if that were the case he would be far more pushy about his request to speak to the child. I agree with Jiraiya on this one, Kaharu. She questioned doubtfully, so he just wants to have a conversation with the Jinchuriki? Forgive me if I don't see it. Why not? Pushed Jiraiya. They're bound by blood. Is it so impossible to believe the man just wants to speak to Naruto? The female snorted. When you get to our age you'll realize that nothing with politics are as easy as they seem. He wants something. The only question is what? The Sannin answered, anyway, it's not like we can afford to deny his request. We need the capital more than ever at this point. This is the first real time an enemy presence has breached the village walls. The people need to see a united front between the village leadership and the leader of the country. The woman testily stated, I'm well aware of that, I just don't like it. With a frustrated sigh, her former teammate remarked, no one does, Kaharu. It doesn't mean we have a say in the matter right now. So let's focus on something we can control in the meantime. Jiraiya tried to change the subject by saying, with that being said, I'd like to raise something important. I noticed that Danzo and his secret army weren't present during the attack. Mighty convenient, isn't it? The declaration was met with a glimmer of silence. With apparent concern, Kaharu questioned, do you honestly think he had something to do with it? From the corner of his eye, Homura looked at her. Is it so hard to believe? It wouldn't surprise me personally. Jiraiya frowned and remarked, that's one area I always disagreed with Sensei on. He let Danzo have too much power without making sure to keep him in check. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that the majority of our problems recently were a direct correlation to his underhanded actions. Homura gave a nod. Hiruzen was always more worried about offending Danzo. Kaharu added, if this is the case then the reason is obvious. Even after all these years he still covets the position of Hokage. The problem is he just might get it at this rate. One more moment of silence. Kaharu started hesitantly, Jiraiya. But Jiraiya interrupted her with a wave of his hand. The Toad Sage said bluntly, forget it. I'd be a horrible Hokage. I can't sit still for too long and my spy network is vital to the village's protection. My informants won't just meet with anyone else because I'm stuck up in this office. He looked around them. The woman scowled. You're the only viable choice. There isn't anyone in the village strong enough, let alone one with the shinobi pedigree necessary. Homura interrupted with a half question, Hitaki? Maybe might? The woman snorted and shook her head, saying, Hitaki barely survived taking on Orochimaru's general and even failed to kill his combatant. If he had bothered to continue progressing then we probably wouldn't be having this conversation in the first place. He'd have already taken over for Hiruzen if he wasn't so concerned with slacking off and his own guilt. Despite their frowns, the other two men remained silent in support of the Junin. She was absolutely correct. There was nothing they could say anyhow. The village elites placed a lot of emphasis on Kakashi's stunted growth and even regressing abilities. Orochimaru's pet teenager should not have been fighting the renowned Junin to a halt, prodigy or not. Particularly if he had reportedly been given 2 opportunities to use his own method to kill the boy. Furthermore, Guy was never going to be Hokage. Then Homura frowned and said, if we can't find someone, Danzo might just inherit the title. The man's absence was beginning to raise suspicions. I can see the daimyo giving in to his demands if we cannot find a suitable replacement. In fact, that might even be what Danzo is currently counting on. As they started to consider their current issue, the three fell back into silence. The title of Hokage was not only an elected office but also a statement. It was necessary for a Hokage to be someone who demanded respect from other ninja both inside and outside the village. The village leader needed to be feared by the enemy as much as he was admired by the populace. The issue was that there weren't many ninja like that left in Konoha. In the past, there might have been only a small number of ninja at any given time who could have been eligible for Hokage. There would have been at least 3 viable candidates for the role even less than 10 years ago. Right now, finding even one competent shinobi was difficult. With hesitation, Jiraiya began, I may have an idea. Actually, it's the only one I can actually think of. Homura looked through his glasses at the man. Oh, a suitable candidate? The Sannin gave a nod. Maybe the best choice we have right about now. Kaharu scowled. As the answer hit her, she trailed off, and who is? Oh, I didn't think of that. The Sannin noted, because it's also the most difficult choice. As difficult as that specific task would be, Tsunade is an utter pain to find and as stubborn as a mule. Convincing her won't be easy, but in the end I think I can manage it. Manage it? Homura asked in a voice that was clearly disbelieving. You think you can't manage to convince a woman who hasn't been to the village in close to 2 decades to just return and become Hokage? Is she even still fit enough to take the position? Airily, Jiraiya replied, of course. Tsunade may not be as active as I have, but contrary to what you believe, Sensei never really just let her wander about without a purpose. I know for a fact he routinely sent her message leading her to places where her expertise as a medic could be of use. The hemophilia that she suffered from during the Third Great War is long gone now. The 2 village elders exchanged startled looks. That was something Sarutobi had been able to avoid bringing to their attention. That's encouraging to hear, but it still doesn't inspire confidence in the idea that she would willingly return to the village just to take up the mantle of Hokage. Especially considering how adamant she was about her opinion of the position the last time she was here. The Sannin gave a nod. You're right, but I've got a plan. You just leave the little details for me to figure out. Kaharu asked, and if it doesn't work? If you can't convince her to return? The Sannin reassured her, then I'll take the position so that Danzo can't make a claim to it, but I don't think it'll come to that. And what exactly is your plan, Jiraiya? The Toad Sage clarified, to remind her of why the village needs her so badly, and what Sensei would want. But to do that I'll need help in the one person she can possibly relate to. The elderly woman scowled as she considered it. Uzumaki? The Sannin nodded, yes. Naruto and her now share views somewhere along the same lines. The difference is Naruto has been willing to put aside his feelings for the sake of the greater good. I'd like to think he can convince her of the same. The Sannin change. Plus it'll give me a chance to take the boy out of here with everything going on. I still need to explain to him about the Akatsuki. The trip will give me a chance to train him as well. Homura nodded after the 2 elders exchanged another glance. That sounds acceptable. But you're also forgetting the part about the daimyo. No, I'm not. Jiraiya folded his arms and said, in fact I just say we get it over with. I suppose we don't really have a choice in that matter either. Kaharu closed her tired eyes and added, very well. You'll take Uzumaki to meet the daimyo before taking him out of the village for your search while we hold off Danzus from attempting to take the Hokage's chair until you return. Agreed. Homura said, although we have no idea when Uzumaki will awaken. Jiraiya gave a headshake. I wouldn't worry so much about that, the medics think it'll be any day now. His main problem was chakra exhaustion, which is pretty damn difficult to even fathom given the fact that he's an Uzumaki. When I checked yesterday he had already managed to recover half of his reserves. The only reason he's had such trouble waking is the Kyuubi's remaining chakra gumming up his coils. Having the village Jinchuriki visible would help with the statement, good, we can't have the village appear weak at a time like this. Something told the Sannin that he would need all the assistance he could find where they were regarded as important. In the meantime, I'll speak to the Junin in the village about looking for anything suspicious. And I'll take aside the elite Junin to explain the threat of Akatsuki. Very well then. Kaharu let out a sigh. We all have our parts to play. Let's get to work. Stage 5. The aftermath. The overwhelming stench was the first thing he noticed. His face turned up in disgust as the smell of rotting vegetation and spoiled milk crept into his nostrils. He lifted his left arm to shield his nose from the foul smell, and his blue eyes looked around him. As he took in the sights of his new location, confusion started to set in. A sewer? It was the only true answer, and the most obvious. The numerous dripping pipes that hung high above his head added to the layer of murky, filthy water at his feet, which rose above ankle level. Pipes that projected the sound of rushing water passing through them and were the size of an adult man. On either side of him loomed stone walls dotted with tiny red lights. He glanced over his shoulder and saw a long, wide path that just led to a sea of blackness. The young blonde turned slowly in a small circle and muttered, "What in the hell? Where the hell am I?" His question was met with silence. The boy scowled more deeply as he fought the impulse to yell. It was impossible to predict what or who might be present. His left hand inadvertently moved toward his shuriken pouch before grabbing at the air. The genin glanced down at his body in a moment of surprise and made a crucial discovery that had previously escaped his notice. He was naked, completely naked. Naruto looked at his body and deadpanned, "Crap. This had better not be some kind of sick sex joke." Silence, once more. The blonde leaf genin started going through all of the information at his disposal in an attempt to find a solution to his current issue without any indication of provocation. What he remembered last was the first thing that sprang to mind. The boy whispered to no one, "I was falling. The Ichibi was breaking apart." It was, in fact, Naruto's last memory was of losing his footing as he started to sink into the big Biju's body and seeing sand rise up all around him as gravity took over. The enormous sand beast had started to disintegrate in the absence of the one-tailed Biju's chakra. Have I passed away? It was a reasonable guess. It was likely that his body was too badly broken from his fall to the ground to be able to survive. Or perhaps he had been crushed under the weight of the sand that was crumbling all around him. Maybe he had just suffocated? Or was he later discovered by Asuna or Auto Ninja? The genin turned back to face the direction he had been standing in and said, I hope it wasn't that freaky sand kid. It would suck if that little bastard had gotten up and killed me. As he took the opportunity to look around the area once more, the young boy fell into a heavy silence. Since there was no indication of anyone else nearby, he would like to believe that hell would be at least somewhat uncomfortable. Right now, the only noteworthy aspect was that he was by himself, and unclothed. There's no point in standing here. The genin made a decision. Moving on is my best option for answers of some sort. However, which way? His response was a chakra pulse. Naruto's eyes, which were now glowing faintly red, darted off to the west and into the darkness. As the stifling chakra started to fill the space around him, the hairs on his body started to stand up. By now he was familiar with the chakra. The Kyuubi. So this is the seal? Naruto took a step in that direction and pondered. Is this how the interior appears? He concluded that he would have to locate the source in order to obtain answers. The blonde genin followed the red light that was glowing and proceeded to walk deeper into the sewer-like complex, following it through a number of corridors without hesitation. His azure eyes searched the surroundings for any indications of danger. He was heavy and without a weapon, but at least he didn't feel totally powerless. Now that he had truly felt for it, the boy could locate his own chakra signature deep within his stomach, and the wounds from the battle had vanished. Was he healed by the fox demon? That wouldn't be shocking, I guess. With a thought, he extended his right hand and grasped a wall corner. Naturally, he would want me to remain healthy if I passed away. As he turned the corner and came into view of his destination, his thoughts drifted off. With wide eyes, the blonde stepped into the open area and gazed at the enormous gate that seemed to go on forever in all directions. Okay. That's impressive. As he looked more closely at the enormous cage, the genin moved deeper into the room. The bars were as thick as the enormous trees that dot the Fire Country landscape, and they shone ever so slightly. The space beyond the gate appeared to enclose the remainder of the room and was enveloped in total darkness. A sizable piece of paper, the real seal that prevented the Nine Tails from appearing, was seated in the exact center. Despite his animosity toward the Yondaime Hokage, he had to give credit where credit was due. It was mind-blowing to consider that the man had not only resisted the Biju but also succeeded in containing it by building this enormous structure. But he's still a dick. Naruto paused a considerable distance from the bars and narrowed his eyes to try to see what was actually inside. The fox demon must have been imprisoned somewhere on the other side of the bars if this was, in fact, the renowned Hake no Fuin Shiki. And in light of that, he had to get closer to the gate than he otherwise would have. The enormous paw that emerged from the shadows came down so quickly that the blonde was unable to react in time. The house-sized claws sliced through the air like a diving sparrow before slamming down into the murky water right in front of the leaf genin, causing his eyes to widen. Naruto opened his mouth to say something intelligent, but when nothing came out, he closed it and chose to simply gaze at the lone claw that loomed over him. Before the claws were pulled back into the shadows, there was a deep groaning noise coming from inside the gate. When the limb vanished from view once more, the genin finally managed to say, "Well, that's something." The rumbling came back, and the genin finally realized what it was. Laughter, or laughing, at the very least. A voice that sounded like an avalanche's echo said, "Something indeed." The blonde winced at the force of the words alone. Your reaction was far more amusing than I originally believed it would be. When Naruto realized who he was talking to, he admitted, "I expected something. Just not for that, or this resulting conversation." Before two enormous eyes appeared, a deep growl reverberated from inside the cage. As the enormous creature gazed down at him with the kind of attention a human would give a stray house cat, the blonde held his breath. The nine-tailed fox muttered, "Uzumaki Naruto." Given the size of the beast, the sound more than carried over to him. "We finally meet at last." The blonde was at a loss for words to greet him. "Sup." That would be sufficient. In order to get a better view of the young genin sitting next to him, Kakashi leaned forward in his bed. With an equally hard expression, coal-colored eyes gazed back into his mismatched black and red. The younger of the two averted his gaze with a frown of annoyance and frustration after a brief exchange of looks between the genin and his junin. "Sensei." The lone female member of Genin Squad 7, on the other side of the bed, anxiously observed the quiet exchange between her crush and Sensei. Large green eyes peered over the injured man in the hospital bed, nervous hands tangled together. The famous Junin's ribs were covered in a roll of bandages, which spoke volumes about the cost of his role in protecting the village. It dug a deeper hole in her stomach than the already deep nest of guilt. Everybody had taken action. However, she could only be a liability by standing around. An additional indication of how disappointing her first year as a ninja was. The Junin sat back in his hospital bed and said in a harsh voice, "As I said, Sasuke, I didn't teach Naruto any of those techniques. And if you'd actually use your head to think, you'd know that, considering I spent my entire time training you instead." The slight rebuke made the black-haired Genin grit his teeth, but he remained silent and kept his eyes fixed on the hospital floor. The boy balled his hands up in frustration, and Kakashi watched. The Junin closed his eyes and shook his head, letting out a frustrated sigh. Apparently, this boy could not be reached. Sakura trailed off from his other side, looking to the ground as well. "But Sensei," she said, "if you didn't teach him that stuff, then who did?" The Junin opened his eyes to glance at his female pupil, then responded with a simple shrug. In actuality, he was unable to provide a definitive response to that query. However, he was aware of who he could hold responsible for the Jinchuriki's abrupt rise in skill level, specifically, a certain Sannin. But he didn't want to accuse him of something he hadn't done, lest he annoy one of the few Leaf Shinobi who could beat him senselessly. Since he was the one who had originally pawned Naruto off to another shinobi for training, it is unlikely that he could in any case. Could he really be upset with the boy for finding a more capable person to assist with his training? After all, he most likely would have acted similarly if he had been Naruto. But in the first place, this was precisely the sort of thing he hoped to avoid. The dynamics of the team were already chaotic. Since Naruto was suddenly growing in leaps, he didn't want things to get worse if Sasuke's ego started to falter. He would have to make sure to inform the man that he did him no favors if the Sannin was at fault. The Junin returned his focus to his more erratic pupil and began again. "I have a question for you, Sasuke." The Genin raised his head again and met the man's mismatched eyes. After a moment of staring, Kakashi posed what may have been the most significant question to date. "Why does it matter so much to you?" The question caused the raven-haired Genin to blink in surprise. Kakashi saw the boy open his mouth to respond, then just leave it hanging. As he considered the question the Junin had just posed, the heir to the Uchiha clan frowned and closed his mouth. What made it so crucial? "I think I know why." The two shinobi turned to face the young Kunyachi, who flushed at the unexpected attention, but Sakura's words were so soft that they were hardly audible. With unusual nervous energy, the girl rubbed her hands together. The girl suddenly wished she hadn't spoken at this particular moment. At last, she added, "Well, I guess because it's Naruto. It's not something we expected." "But why not?" Kakashi asked, glancing between his learners. "Why is the idea so foreign? The idea that Naruto can improve?" The Uchiha heir's first response was, "Because he's the dope." The answer made Kakashi snort. "So because Naruto was last in your class, a class that graduated from the academy 8 months ago, he isn't allowed to improve himself through training?" It was an appropriate query. Sakura gave a headshake. "That's not what we're saying, Kakashi, sensei." "Then what are you saying?" The girl struggled to find the right word and trailed off. "It's just that the idea that Naruto can do something so amazing," Kakashi suggested helpfully. "You're both upset because Naruto has something amazing to his name other than simple shadow clones." His eyes suddenly met the girl's. "We aren't upset. Sasuke is." Kakashi calmly retorted. "Aren't you, Sasuke? You're upset Naruto can now do something that you can't." The Uchiha heir chose to frown as usual and remained silent. Despite the lack of response, Kakashi went on, "But that's just not all that it is. It's also the fact that Naruto coined his technique Akeke Genkai. It's not a simple ninjutsu he learned but rather a bloodline limit technique." His face suddenly became stiff. "And the idea that Naruto could have something unique to his person horrifies you." Colored eyes came alive with an inner rage, and the scowl transformed into an outright frown. The Uchiha bit out, "That's the point though. Akeke Genkai implies an inheritance. A history. Naruto doesn't have any of that. He's an orphan, a nobody." The intensity of Kakashi's expression only increased. The Junin's own rage at the instant dismissal of one of his students by another is evident in his tone when he says, "But that's where you're wrong. He is somebody. Contrary to what you seem to believe, Sasuke the Uchiha clan isn't the only name in the world." The scowl deepened. "What's that supposed to mean?" Kakashi told him, shaking his head, "It means that the Uzumaki certainly weren't nobodies. And the idea that you keep calling them that is a slap to the face of your own clan as well. The two genins' faces went slack with surprise, and they blinked. It was Sakura who recovered first. She had raised her eyebrows in shock and bewilderment, asking, "You mean there really was an Uzumaki clan?" Kakashi clarified, "Of course. And they were among the strongest around." As he glanced over the two wide-eyed gazes of his two genin, a deep sense of satisfaction began to surface. In fact, they were related to both the Senju and Uchiha clans. Which means Sasuke here is spitting on his own clan's legacy. Wait. That. The girl interrupted once more, shaking her head as though to dismiss the thought. That doesn't make any kind of sense. Why haven't we heard of them before? Because it was before your time. Kakashi answered right away. Most of the ninja in the village who were on active duty at that time are retired. Your parents' generation were still young, like yourselves, when the Uzumaki clan and Uzushiogakure were destroyed. Uzu. Kakashi found the boy's puzzled expression particularly endearing. If that's the case, how do you know what happened? At the question, the joy the Junin had felt until then vanished suddenly. His eyes drooped with a profound sadness, and his face abruptly became withdrawn and his thoughts thoughtful. The Junin's abrupt change in attitude was examined by the two genin. I know the story, because my family is connected to it. In spite of the size of the two eyes staring down at him, Naruto was certain in the back of his mind that the nine-tailed fox demon was actually much bigger than it seemed to him at the time. Still, the sight was pretty damn impressive. Elephant-sized rows of teeth, each filed to an incredibly fine point, emerged from a gap beneath the two eyeballs. When the enormous beast stepped forward, the world surrounding the blonde was suddenly enveloped in the dazzling glow of its potent chakra, and the deeply rumbling chuckle returned. The titanic Biju repeated in contemplation, "Sup, what an unconventional greeting." Naruto just chose to look up at the big fox without saying anything. Still, the Kyuubi went on. I usually get yells of surprise and fear, or screams of horror, but never has anyone ever said "sup" to me before. That mouth appeared once more. First time for everything. I always like to try and strive for surprising people. The maw changed into something like a grin, and the Kyuubi's mouth widened. But I'm not a person. Doesn't mean anything to me. Something shone in its eyes as the enormous chakra construct trailed off. I suppose not. Uzumaki Naruto. You have become interesting lately. The blonde shrugged, trying not to let the Biju intimidate him. Which, in his opinion, was quite good. Interesting is better than boring. The Biju said, "Oh, I agree. And you were very boring for years. As it stands, I could do nothing but sit around and watch as you did practically nothing. But these past few months, you did rather well with that fool Shukaku, all things considered." Naruto declared, "Just worked with what I had." Then he scowled. "By the way, thanks." That word appeared to be a trigger. As it looked back at the blonde genin in front of its prison, the Biju's big eyes appeared to instantly narrow, the last-tailed beast's already intense gaze doubling in focus. Every word was measured and low. What did you just say? Naruto's scowl deepened. Was there anything he said incorrectly? Thanks. The two fell silent once more, with the Biju looking at the blonde in literal bewilderment and Naruto waiting for a response. Elaborate. The stern command came. The blonde's frown turned to one of disbelief. The genin attempted to elaborate on what he believed to be a straightforward topic. Thanks for the chakra. It was your chakra that allowed me to keep going long enough to win that fight. There was no way in hell I was going to be able to keep standing without it, let alone summon some help. With its own skeptical expression, the fox gazed at the blonde genin. The genin realized then exactly what the Biju's issue was. Dryly, he asked, I take it the other two didn't say that too often? The enormous demon's maw reshaped itself into what looked like a scowl in response. Despite the fact that one of them was his own mother, Naruto continued with a wise nod. Yep. Sounds like the last two were complete assholes. One thing he was well versed in was, and I know quite a bit about people who are pretty selfish and feel like they're owed something. Before the Biju made a sound that the boy thought was a snort, there was another moment of silence. Before the maw restored its former smile, the big head trembled as though to refute a thought. You are interesting indeed, Uzumaki Naruto. The first of you humans to thank me. While they were still talking about it, Naruto added, for that matter, thanks for the other times as well. The forest. The bridge. I would have been dead both times if not for your help. And I know that the seal is supposed to allow me to just take your chakra whenever I need it, but I still get the idea that you could make that a very difficult process for me. So there's that. The Biju retorted, what makes you think I was helping you? Did it not occur to you that the actions I took were for my own benefit? Naruto gave a shrug. I'm sure they were. After all, if I die you go with me, but that doesn't change what happened. The enormous animal shifted its weight onto its back legs. The Biju's smile widened as he said, very strange for a human. But interesting. But you're thanking me for the wrong things, boy. Naruto scowled once more. What's that supposed to mean? When the Biju said, exactly what I said. You're thanking me for the wrong thing, child. Her tone was one of audible satisfaction. If you think my chakra is all that I've given you, then you're sadly mistaken. As he processed the cryptic statement, the genin's frown widened. What else might the fox demon be discussing? Only when his life had been in complete danger had he been able to connect with the demon. Apart from that, he had no. The response struck him like a ton of bricks. The blonde half murmured, the Shoten. The Kyuubi acknowledged with a growl. The Nine Tails affirmed, but of course. Something like that is certainly within my control and power, even from this place. After all, many of my other kin often bequeath their own vessels with abilities beyond the normal limits that you humans possess. Naruto said slowly, we were under the impression that it was a Keke Toda. The beast nodded, much to the blonde's surprise, and it is an inheritance from further down your line. The genin freely acknowledged, I don't know what you're saying after that. In what ways did the nine-tailed fox assist him? The chakra construct started to explain, just because it is a bloodline inheritance doesn't mean that you would have obtained it. Naruto nodded slowly as the Biju explained, your own chakra natures would have stopped short of being able to utilize the ability if it weren't for my interference. I simply unraveled the bindings your own personal genetics put on you. The genin asked, is that what the others of your kind do? You mentioned they did somewhat of the same thing. The fox gave a negative shake of its big head. No, most of my kin are sealed within whomever can take their corrosive chakra. More often than not they do not have the pedigree that you happen to possess. In this instance it is a slight boon that I have continually been imprisoned in members of your clan. The fox clenched its teeth in annoyance. I have had ample time to become familiar with your line's chakra structure. That makes sense. But I don't suppose you'd like to explain why you go through the effort in the first place. When the fox demon snorted, the boy was almost knocked down by the force of its enormous nostrils. To bring its eyes close to level with the much smaller leaf genin, it leaned forward on its front paws. Even though his rational side warned him that it was dangerous, Naruto stared up into the large pupils without flinching. The fox demon started over, saying, let's make one thing clear first. I've been telling you these things because it benefits me. The reason I've gone so far to help you is simply because you've been unable to truly defend yourself. Up to this point you've managed to get by with what meager training and skill you possessed, although the old Hokage of yours has helped you out in that regard. As Naruto took in the words, a hard line formed on his lips. It was the reality. You seem to have a habit of getting into more life and death situations than someone your age has any business getting involved with. The fox demon went on. Even at a young age, from when I first activated your technique, you've managed to get yourself into trouble. This is my way of watching out for myself without giving you free rein to my own chakra. If you can utilize this ability to improve yourself, you can keep the both of us alive. The blonde gave a nod. Fair enough. The Biju sat back up and exclaimed, good. With that being said, I also have to stress the matter of personal pride. As the first and most powerful of my kin, I can't have my vessel being the weakest, which you are as of right now. Many of the others have been embedded inside of their host for several years now, decades even, and have affected their vessels to a great extent. I can't have you proving to be the weakest of the bunch. Naruto went on, and I don't want to be, so you won't have a problem with my drive for improvement. Of that I have no doubt. But with that being said, the question is, can you honestly keep up the level of progression you've made in the last few months? That will be the key to how far you manage to go in this world, and if I have to be imprisoned, I would rather not have all the hard work I've put into you already go to waste. The fox was sneering at the blonde. You can't keep relying on my chakra to save you. There may be someone you come across who can suppress my like that damn Senju and Uchiha. It'll be up to you and your resolve to improve enough to not need my assistance. Once more, Naruto scowled. I got it, keep training. The fox returned to its front paws and closed its enormous eyes, declaring, that's all that I require from you, whelp. Keep training and I'll keep rewarding you. When it comes to you, the deeper I dig, the more I find. What's that supposed to mean? The Nine Tails reappeared with the words, nothing for now, boy. Now be gone. I tire of your presence. The boy frowned. And just how am I going to do that? The blonde had barely time to do more than yell as he folded his hands over his eyes as the Nine Tails snapped its eyes back open with an irritated growl before a surge of its stifling chakra surged forward. In front of its very eyes, the Kyuubi saw the blonde being violently ejected from the seal. The great creature let out a snort of laughter. Very interesting indeed. The heir of the Uchiha clan scowled as he considered the odd words. Kakashi sighed after glancing between his two current genin. It was never easy to tell this story. The Junin started, then trailed off a little. My father. He swallowed the lump in his throat after taking a deep breath. My father was one of the greatest shinobi the Leaf Village has ever produced. The two genin who were silent gave their sensei the most attention they had ever given him. For their own reasons, they are all insatiably curious. They could see the toll this was having on the typically reticent and slothful Junin. His eyes were filled with pain. As his hazy memories started to clear, the Junin recited, he was known as the Leaf Village's White Fang, a title that came from the special chakra blade he carried around with him into battle. They used to say that he was by far the strongest shinobi of his generation, and that he was a candidate for Yondaime Hokage because he possessed strength that was said to rival, if not surpass, that of the three Sannin. At the announcement, the two genin exchanged a startled expression. The father of Kakashi was unknown to them, and if not all the well-known names in the shinobi world, the academy had made it a point to review the strongest ninja the village had produced. Before realizing what they had been contemplating, the Junin looked from one to the other. The reason you don't know this is because of the great failure I'm leading toward. One of the group's smart kunyachi asked, what failure? She was still unfamiliar with the notion that the blonde had noble ancestry. Why have we never heard of this before, and what does this have to do with you we're talking about with Naruto's clan? She asked. The Junin gave her a frustrated look in return. I'm getting to that. The girl stepped back from the bed and held up her hands in a mock surrender. Kakashi observed her before continuing. Toward the end of the Second Great War, my father led a group of 3 other shinobi deep into enemy territory Akirigakure, to be exacta on a mission that was extremely important to the village. Extraction of a VIP was the goal. An informant who claimed his life was in jeopardy because of the sensitive information he had obtained and who had sent an urgent request for extraction. In order to gain access to the chain of islands that made up Water Country, my father led the immediate response team. Saving the informant at all costs was his goal. It's at least an A-ranked mission, the Uchiha heir scowled. Even though he was in such a hazardous situation, he was S-ranked. What then took place? Things went bad just days into the mission, the Junin said, glancing at the boy. His squad was totally destroyed in an ambush. The rest of my father's team was left to fend for themselves while he engaged in combat with 2 of Kiri's notorious swordsmen of the mist. Things had gotten out of control by the time he was able to change the course of the conflict. Already, 1 member of his team had been killed and another had been taken prisoner. The situation of the mission was dire. My father was left with a hard choice. It was either continue on with the mission or retreat as it was. Apparently he was sure he could still reach the teammate who had been captured and free her from enemy hands. But in order to do so he had to leave and go in the opposite direction from the rendezvous point. Reflectively, Sasuke asked, so he chose to save his teammates? It's like you said, about shinobi who abandoned their squad mates being worse than trash. Slowly, the Junin nodded. Yes, and while I agree with that idea, even I can't pretend that this is one time there should have been an exception to the rule. The Junin breathed deeply. In his place, knowing what I know now, I wouldn't have hesitated to complete the mission instead. The two genin exchanged disbelieving glances. The Junin's words contradicted everything he had taught them during the initial stages of their genin training. It was sacrilegious for the Junin to support his own father's desertion of his teammates. By the time my father had reached his squad mate, they had already tortured and raped her. The informant had been killed and my father was forced to fight a running battle in order to protect his remaining team as they retreated. The mission was a complete and utter failure, and to make things worse his captured teammate committed suicide shortly thereafter. It was one of the greatest failures in the history of our village. As the story went on, Sakura, who had been moved uneasily from side to side, had now turned completely pale. One of the actual horrors that Kunyachi had to deal with in the field was the fear of rape. In the world of shinobi, women were frequently sexually assaulted as a form of torture and interrogation, and there was little regard for gender. The young girl had a terrible impression of the Mist Village because of that and its notorious reputation. At this point in the story, even the typically stoic and brooding heir of the Uchiha clan had blanched. It was difficult to comprehend how a mission could so drastically go wrong. He had been reminded that it was always the right thing to do to save a teammate. However, this was a prime illustration of why that rhetoric should not be carried out. Sasuke looked back at the Junin, but even if he wanted to, he couldn't stop the words from flowing. It gets worse, doesn't it? Kakashi gave a slow nod. Yes, it gets far darker. The thought made the little Kunoichi squeak. I'm going to grab a chair if you don't mind. She dragged it back to the bedside, and Kakashi watched with drooping eyes as his genin rushed over to a chair propped near the doorway. With a hollowed-out expression, the pink-haired girl sank down and returned her focus to her Junin sensei. After that, the man turned to face the heir to the Uchiha clan, who had turned back to face the floor. He noticed that the boy's fist was clenching the side of his own seat, seemingly to release some of the tension in his body. Before beginning again, the copy ninja inhaled deeply. At first the failed mission was overlooked. Regular forces and civilians knew nothing about it. Only the higher-ups were privy to the details and could turn the other way given who my father was. But then the problems started and they came hard and fast. He took a deep breath. Informants all around the continent had heard of the mission and immediately stopped all communication with our forces. The idea that they could not count on us to keep our promises hurt us greatly. In fact, to this day, Konoha has one of the worst standing intel gathering groups. Despite Jiraiya-sama's personal network, however, simple genin were unaware of its existence. Kakashi shook his head and added, "But that of course isn't the hard part to swallow. It's what that dead informant had for us that would ultimately lead to so much pain and misery." After swallowing, Sasuke returned his focus to the Junin. The typically arrogant and superior demeanor suspended in the context of the current story is, "I think I see where this is going." He understood the gravity of what lay ahead. The Junin nodded. The Uchiha clan would be the only people in the village to comprehend the next atrocity. One of the Junin said, "You'd be right, Sasuke. The information the man had obtained was classified and straight from the Mizukage's desk. We now know it detailed a small alliance between Cloud and Mist with smaller correspondences with our longtime enemies in Iwa. In those documents were detailed plans about Kiri's bold and daring scheme to remove a major player out of the way." Sakura moved around in her chair. Despite the apparent response, she inquired, "And who was it?" Still, the Junin answered, "Uzushiogakure, the village of Whirling Tides, and, most importantly, home to the famed Uzumaki clan." The genin looked at each other again. The Uzumaki clan had a particular set of skills that made them very dangerous. Kakashi went on. They had an incredible amount of ability in the obscure ninja art of Fuinjutsu and, when combined with their own personal style of Kenjutsu and enormous chakra reserves, were an extremely powerful clan. It was because of this and their proximity to both Kiri and the shore that they were targeted. As his sharp mind started to piece things together, Sasuke nodded. They were dangerous to the Mist Village because they were stealing business. The fact that they were allies to our village only made the decision to destroy them even easier. Kakashi gave another nod. "Yes, Sasuke. The attack on Uzu came far too quickly for any real defense to be mounted. In fact, things were far worse than many know. You see, Uzu was also home to some other powerful clans. Most notable the Kagaya and Hizuka clans. While the Hizuka clan had a legit tie-in to the Mist Village, due to the fact that one of the Mizukage hailed from them, it was the Kagaya clan who was noted to be at fault here." Sakura scowled. "Why does that name sound familiar?" Kakashi explained, "Because for someone like you it is. You've probably gone over them in a book somewhere along the way. But for the most part they're now extinct as well, except for a few." "Where did I read about them?" Kakashi thought, in a book depicting the Mist Village probably. He had only known them for a week before, but he had heard that they were known for having a powerful Kekkei Gakkai. Slowly, the girl nodded as she started to recall. They were a major clan from the Mist. Kakashi went on, and before that a major clan of Uzu. But they became jealous of the Uzumaki clan and had dalliances with the Mizukage. During the attack the Kagaya clan turned on the Uzumaki and many other allies. And afterward they, along with the Hizuka, were given noble status in Kiri. Sakura started slowly, trying to gather her thoughts. "So, the Uzumaki clan was completely destroyed with the village?" Over his mask, Kakashi scowled. He shook his head in response. "Yes and no, even with the Kaguya's betrayal and the surprise assault from Kiri and Kumo, the Uzumaki clan and Uzu still stood strong. The reinforcements we sent their way were cut off by a regiment from Iwa that had managed to get into position without anyone the wiser. Although that's a whole different side to the story. It was, too. The suspicion that had grown over the past 10 or so years suggested that Orochimaru might be responsible for the Leaf Village's failure to support Uzu's defense. The now famous Leaf trader had led the regiment that the Sandaime had pulled away from the front lines to aid the village of Whirling Tides. The Sanin's betrayal now tarnished the notion that the group that included both the Snake Sanin and Kakashi's own father had failed to make it in time to aid their allies. At that point, it was widely known that the Uzumaki clan had denied the Snake Summoner access to their renowned Fuinjutsu archives. It was now widely believed by the Leaf Village elites that the man had deliberately delayed in offering help as retaliation. The village's top brass was familiar with the tale of Uzushiogakir's final stand. Even with enemies surrounding them from all sides, the village still managed to survive for 4 days and 5 nights before the last man went down. During that time, members of the more prominent clans were spirited away. Some were hunted down and others were accepted into various villages who coveted their prowess for fuinjutsu. The idea that Naruto is the only Uzumaki left is due to the fact that we have no proof of any others. Sakura hesitated to nod, then thought of something. What about their techniques? You said they were famous for fuinjutsu and that the Uzumaki clan had their own personal style of kenjutsu. Did the other clans have anything like that? Kakashi affirmed, yes. Many people were unaware that the original group of mist swordsmen had used simple blades rather than the legendary weapons they now wielded. But many of the clans, the Uzumaki included, took the precautions necessary to destroy as much as they could when it became apparent the village would fall. I know that most of the Uzumaki's strongest techniques are now lost to time. In fact, the most notable items stolen were the 7 swords that the Shinshin and Shu use today. They were originally weapons forged by the Uzumaki clan. The Junin said sourly, as for my father, he committed suicide several months later out of shame. I was a young chunin then, closing in on Junin, when he took his life and left me with his shame. That shaped my life for many years until my first mission as a Junin commander in the next Shinobi War. A conflict that Konoha began shortly after the next. However, few were also aware of that. The heir of the Uchiha clan crossed his arms and grunted. So the dope had a clan that got wiped out. Is that where he got his Kekkei Genkei from? Wincing at the pain the motion caused, the Junin shrugged. I'd like to think so. I remember one of the few Uzumaki clan members I did know was famous for having some peculiar chakra. She could do some pretty amazing things with it that went far beyond the normal where chakra is considered. A complete understatement. As they considered the Junin's story, the 2 genin fell back into silence. It presented their obnoxious teammate in a different light. Prior to that, they just thought he was a lucky orphan. But to be aware that he was descended from a real clan of distinction and that there was no one left to teach him the value of family, it completely altered their perception of the boy. Kakashi glanced at each of them. Kakashi advised the 2 young ninja he was in charge of, saying, look, if you want to know about Naruto's techniques then ask him yourself. And if he chooses not to tell you about it you have to accept it and move on. After all, he doesn't ask you guys for personal information. The genin from Uchiha snorted. Hard to do when we can't even find him. Sakura nodded in agreement, and Kakashi blinked both eyes. Junin asked slowly, what do you mean you can't find him? Sakura scowled. We went looking for him. His apartment, the Hokage's tower, that ramen shop. A Junin told us he was on medical leave from the fights but we can't find him at either village hospital. The Junin blinked once more, incredulously. So where on earth was he? He was immediately drawn to the hanging light fixtures and slate gray ceiling. Then the pain struck, a searing ache that radiated from the center of his body to every part of his body. His throat was extremely dry, and his muscles had started to ache dully. Before giving up and letting his head drop back onto the plush bed with a gentle thump, the leaf genin struggled to raise it. So you're finally awake, kid? The blonde made a feeble attempt to at least turn his head in the direction of the voice. Jiraiya entered the young ninja's field of vision out of sympathy. With genuine laughter visible in his eyes, the tall Sannin smiled down at the boy. It's been long enough. A week is far beyond what I'd ever think you'd be down for. Incredulous, the blue-eyed genin blinked his tired eyes. A week? What on earth had transpired? The Sannin crossed his arms over his chest and said, you've missed quite a bit. The world couldn't stop for ya, kid. The old man died facing Orochimaru but did some real damage to the bastard, can't even use his hands for ninjutsu anymore. Because you were stuck here you missed his funeral. Just yesterday to be exact. Naruto blinked once more, his mind and eyes much more open than before. Was the Sandaime no longer alive? Right now, he wasn't sure how he felt about that. On the one hand, the man had made every effort to atone for his transgressions over the past few months. On the other hand, he had undoubtedly made the blonde's already challenging life much more difficult to handle by his decisions. Jiraiya went on, you did a job on that sand Jinchuriki. But the brat escaped. The village is a mess but still standing. We kicked their asses and forced them on their way. But as it stands we've got some real problems that need to be sorted out. As his mind tried to process what the Sannin was saying, the blonde just relaxed and listened. Hearing that all of his efforts had not been in vain was encouraging. After he had fainted, he had been concerned that the Tsunade Jinchuriki had just reformed the Biju. It was encouraging to learn that the battle had shifted in favor of the leaf as a result of his near-death experience. With a clap of his hands, the Toad Sage declared, first thing first. We need a new Hokage. I don't really want the job but agreed to take it if I absolutely have to. But we aren't that desperate yet. There's one more person who I'd like to think could do a better job at this village leader thing than I could. The problem is she's currently MIA, so we, me and you that is, have been given the task of going to find her. Naruto looked up at the Toad Sage, clearly bewildered. What on earth was he doing? As though listening to his thoughts, Jiraiya went on to explain. Along the way I want to teach you a few tricks. And more importantly tell you about something very dangerous. Plus, it's a chance to get out of the village for a little while. Before a big smile split the blonde's face, the Sannin leaned forward over the bed and met his eyes directly. And in order to do all of that we've got to get you of this damn underground hospital. The Anbu get all twitchy when people who aren't a part of the group come into their areas. The man was rubbing his hands together. Not to mention you've got a meeting with the daimyo to attend as well. The blonde felt a surge of annoyance. Why on earth did he want it? So take one more day to rest up. We've got a lot of work to do. Shunin Uzumaki. Naruto took a quick look around the tiny space, observing its high ceiling and stark white walls. Before being summoned to the Hokage's tower, the recently appointed blonde Shunin had only been back in the public eye for 5 hours. There were several meeting rooms on this floor, including the tiny one he had been swiftly shown. Without employing his recently acquired chakra sensing abilities, he was aware that the Toad Sage was standing outside, carrying his travel gear. As soon as this was over, they would be heading out of the village. Which Naruto hoped would happen now. Rather, he had been compelled to sit quietly for the last 3 minutes, staring aimlessly while attempting to avoid looking at the man across the small table from him. The aroma of fragrant tea rose in the air before him, but a small saucer of steaming hot tea remained untouched. Even though the spices smelled delicious, they caused his sensitive nose to twitch. Every corner of the room had a silent guardian. Each of the 3 men and 1 woman was fully outfitted for combat. The blonde was painfully aware of their presence in the room. They belonged to the elite combat forces that catered to the demands of the royal court, as did the 2 other members who stood on either side of the room's entrance. The work of the 12 guardians had brought them fame. Every member was a competent leader and a skilled fighter. The blonde had started to classify each as a possible threat first and foremost, and the Sandame's brief lessons had once again taken center stage. A bald man in monastic robes stood to one corner. As he stood attentively off to the sides, the dim lights continued to shine on his oiled head. His angular brown eyebrows were plucked, and his dark eyes watched the room with keenness. The blonde had no clue what he might be concealing beneath his long sleeves because the man's hands were folded behind his back. The next was a man brandishing a sword, clad from chest to feet in the black armor of a samurai. On top of his head, his hair, which had been seasoned with salt and pepper, was pulled up in a fancy bun. The sheeted blade at the man's left hip caught the blonde shinobi's attention. He estimated it to be an okatana. There was no question in his mind that the man was skilled at what he did. The kunyachi was the third. She was a small woman, perhaps in her mid to early 20s. Her shoulder length teal hair was accentuated by 2 yellow hair clips on either side of her head. Her kimono was cream in color with light blue trim. Her thin lips were pressed tightly in a line, matching her short nose and sharp gray eyes. Naruto was unable to determine her area of expertise from a single glance, which made any defense he attempted to mount problematic. Standing tall in the corner to the blonde's left blind spot was the final one, a shinobi. His black hair was cropped closely, and he looked to the blonde like he was in his late teens. His torso was covered in blood-red body armor that contrasted with black pants. The blonde appeared to be a close-range fighter due to his tapped hands and sleeveless biceps. His piercing silver gaze was fixed only on the younger blonde shinobi. Refusing to be intimidated, Naruto returned the stare. They both looked at each other. This meeting is long overdue. Unable to resist, Naruto turned to face the man and made eye contact. The young blonde was met with thoughtful gazes from the daimyo of Fire Country. With his long black hair pulled back in a ponytail and the headpiece resting softly on top of his skull, he was fully clothed in the attire of his position. Yellow flowers and red flames adorned the flowing orange kimono. Despite the blonde's silence, the older man went on, "I hope your recovery went well." A glimpse of something the blonde could not identify flickered through the man's eyes before he gave a faint smile. "Due to my high standing I am privy to many details that the general public had no knowledge of. Your summon was very impressive." Before he spoke, the blonde licked his lips and swallowed to calm himself. It was the most polite thing he could do under the situation. "I'll be sure to tell him that you approved of his performance, sir." With a nod of agreement, the man glanced over at the young shinobi sitting in front of him and tilted his head slightly. Less than an hour later, he had heard the blonde's release from the Black Ops Underground Medical Center. The man seized the chance to meet as soon as possible because he was certain that the village's current leadership had implemented some kind of strategy to restrict his interactions with the boy. To be honest, they pretended that he was going to take the child away by spirit. The man went on, "Your performance in the exam was most impressive as well, and most surprising to be honest. What little information the village provided said nothing about your capabilities as a shinobi. It had come to my attention that you were mostly lacking due to experience." The blonde decided against shrugging. Hadn't he told the fox demon something like that the day before? "I aim to surprise people. I enjoy breaking through the expectations people put on me." The man slowly gave a nod. "In that way you remind me of someone." He briefly looked away from the blonde before looking back at him. "But then again, you're a far different person than Minato-kun was at your age." To his credit, Naruto didn't appear to notice the abrupt name change. No tensing of his body, no gritting of his teeth in frustration. The blonde gave him the most blank stare he had ever given. Now that he was a real shinobi, the days of teasing the different village authorities after his intricate antics had undoubtedly been useful. He usually showed his feelings by showing them off. However, the blonde now had at least enough emotional control to keep his thoughts to himself, thanks to the Sandame's efforts. Therefore, he managed to hide everything behind an Iron Faw section aide, even though in reality he wanted to sneer at the name alone. The daimyo went on to say, "Minato-kun was also a much different shinobi than you. He was the kind of person who liked to wait and see. Something that was also apparent in his own style as a ninja. I can tell from just your exam bout that you're the kind who likes to dictate the pace as opposed to react." In an attempt to be courteous, Naruto gave a very slight nod. "You are correct, sir." The man moved around in his seat. A contrast in style and attitude. Despite how much you look like your father, you are very different than him. The teenage shinobi tensed at the words, and Naruto looked over. As he examined the boy, the guardian narrowed his eyes to the blonde. The daimyo took a sip of his own tea and tasted it, pretending not to notice. Made and imported from River Country, this blend was one of his favorites. The nation's leader put his tea back on the table and said, "I brought you here to ask you something important. A simple question with a lot of weight attached to it." Before giving a rigid nod, the blonde shinobi returned his focus to the man. He was intrigued by what the daimyo had been pleading with him for, and why he had apparently decided to wait a full week following the surprise attack rather than merely summoning him to his palace. The man parted his lips and his eyes narrowed on the blonde with sudden, intense focus. "Have you spoken to Akira recently?" The direct question caused Naruto to blink in surprise. "I'm sorry," was the only thing he could say, before he calmly folded his hands in his lap and fixed his eyes on the blonde chunin sitting in front of him. His great uncle shifted back in his chair. He reiterated, "Have you had any correspondences with Akira? Letters? Conversations? Has she sent you any gifts or messages?" Naruto couldn't help but squint his eyes in perplexity. After a moment to gather his thoughts, he began, "I'm sorry. You seem to be under the impression that I've met her in the first place." The daimyo merely challenged with a raised right eyebrow. "Is that so? You've never even spoken to your older sister before? Never?" Naruto crossed his arms and said, "No, forget about being polite. I didn't even know I had an older sister until the Hokage told me a few months ago." The man seemed more interested in that than in the blonde's tone shift. His eyes narrowed. "I was told that Sarutobi had informed you of everything." Naruto shook his head and said, "Yeah, when he absolutely had to. Which was literally just a few months ago." Daimyo scowled. "I don't think I understand what you're saying." The blonde let out a low sigh. "I got into some trouble during the second portion of the exam. Things happened that affected my training later. After that, the Sandame thought it was finally time to come clean about everything he had hidden from me over the years." And it was clear that the man was interested in the topic. What he had been told was entirely different from this. The Sandame had been given access to a lot of information. What did he tell you? About it all? What had he conveyed? The blonde began bluntly, that Akira killed our grandfather by decapitating him. That we had different mothers because of said grandfather's insistence on having a proper heir, instead of one born from a kunyachi. That my father didn't get along with him in the least. That he was originally sent to Konoha for a diplomatic stunt to show unity between Fire Country and Konoha. As he searched his mind for more of the dialogue the Sandame had told him, Naruto let out another sigh. The daimyo just sat quietly and listened to his great-nephew's words carefully. Naruto went on, "The Sandame said my father made the name Namikaze up. That his own mother had died of illness young, but wanted for him to continue on studying the shinobi arts. He was arranged to marry Akira's mother originally but fell in love with my mother. So my grandfather forced him to at the very least procreate because he would never recognize my mother as noble stock despite Uzu's connections to Konoha. The Fire Country leader's frown deepened, and he narrowed his eyes. What else? Chunin, who was blonde, shrugged. Nothing else, to be honest. Just that my grandfather decreed that no one would have contact with me. And that even after he died no one had ever came to speak to me. Everything else family-wise was on my mother's side. About how she survived the night long enough to make a few choices. Made sure that anyone else of Uzumaki blood who she had been in contact with had no idea that I survived. He ventured that was because she didn't want me removed from the village or for any Uzumaki that settled here to inherit the hatred directed at me by name association. That was why he was so full of regret for his mother. Given that she had just given birth with him at the time, he couldn't completely condemn Uzumaki Kushina for her involvement in the Kyuubi's attack, but her subsequent choices more than made up for it. Naruto believed that she had prioritized the village even when she was on the verge of death. He was as angry at the thought that his own mother had died, ensuring that he would never really understand what it meant to be an Uzumaki as he was at the Yondaime's choice to seal the beast in the first place. He would never forgive the woman for that injustice, regardless of her motivations. The daimyo silently gazed back at him. With all the respect he could muster at the time, Naruto returned the man's flat stare. His inability to communicate effectively concealed his inner turmoil. To be honest, it hurt more than it hurt to think that the first person in his family had only spoken to him to pique his own interest. He had foolishly assumed that the man had come to ask him how he was handling his life up to this point, or at the very least, to show genuine interest. Rather, he encountered someone who was interested in answering his questions for his own benefit. If she's pursuing you, Naruto told himself this, then, I hope you receive the same treatment that your brother received. In any case, why did he need family? Phase 6. The Kasan the Sannin looked at his young charge incredulously and demanded bluntly, he asked you what? With obvious annoyance in his eyes, the newest Leaf Chunin turned to face his taller companion. With a puff of irritation, the blonde repeated, he asked if I'd spoken to Akira. Seemed he was surprised when I said I hadn't. As he followed his smaller companion, the Toad Sage waved both hands in exclamation, what the hell is that supposed to mean? At what point were you supposed to have time to meet her? The blonde Chunin gave a headshake. As he reached into the pockets of his new trousers, Naruto explained, I said something along the same lines, as respectable as I could manage of course. I didn't even know I had an older sister until 2 months ago. When was I supposed to have spoken with her? The daimyo's question had changed the course of the meeting with the Fire Country leader. For a while, Naruto had just stared back in shock before responding with a denial. Naturally, the man had persisted in pushing, as if he had anticipated that the blonde would eventually have a conversation with his enigmatic older sibling. The fact that Naruto had never even met her, much less exchanged letters with her, had disappointed the man. Really, if someone had left Naruto in the first place, what in the world would he want to do with them? The Sannin pondered, she'd be dumb to set foot in Fire Country in the first place. Hell, the whole continent is looking for her. You don't just get away with killing a daimyo. And that's ignoring the fact that it was a kin killing. Instead of speaking, Naruto chose to merely plod away from Konoha along the well-traveled path. Like almost everyone else in Fire Country, he was sufficiently familiar with the apparent story. How the daimyo killer, Akira, brutally murdered their grandfather, the last daimyo of Fire Country, betraying her own blood. Members of the same guardian force that had protected the man had spent years training the young Fire Country princess to defend herself. And then it had suddenly happened one ordinary night. All over the continent, people were talking about how she had decapitated the man cleanly. Unaware that it had been one of the man's own brood, she had fled into the night while everyone searched for the attacker. The man's brother had taken over the vacant position shortly after. An hour earlier, Naruto had spoken for the first time ever with a great uncle. Jiraiya shook his head and said, only you kid. Only your great uncle, who you had never met before, would ask you for information on your long-lost older sister, who you had also never met before. Naruto just gave a frustrated huff. The Sannin, eager to shift the topic, clapped his big hands and said, anyway. I noticed there were some of the guardians inside the room. Anyone of interest? The Chunin frowned slightly as he looked at the man. It was clear that the Sannin was trying to catch something. Recalling the 4 warriors he had classified, he shrugged his shoulders. Although each was unique, he was certain that they were also superior to him at this time. They all were, I guess. Better than I might wager. He could now openly acknowledge when he was outclassed without feeling pressured by his pride to make a stupid claim to the contrary. I suppose they each had their own strengths and weaknesses. The Toad Sage gave a headshake. I'm not looking for that. I'm talking about if any of them interested you personally. or rather I should say showed an interest in you? Is there someone you're looking for in particular? Asked Naruto, turning to face the man. Someone younger? Asked the Sannin. Bad attitude? The description caused Naruto's eyebrows to rise. Yeah, black hair, and tried to stare me down. The sage smiled abruptly. Broadly, Naruto gave him a wary glance. What? With a satisfied expression, the Sannin said, that was she. I'd heard some time ago he was made one of the guardians. The blonde furrowed his brow. Who the hell is that? Jiraiya's eyes wrinkled at the corners and his smile widened. Your cousin. The Chunnin's blonde eyes blinked. Had he heard the man correctly? Excuse me? The toad sage went on with delight. The son of Minato's younger sister. Remember, his mother died young? Your grandfather didn't even wait 3 full months before remarrying, this time from a noble in Fire Country's own court. The girl was born about 10 years after your father. Never did get along with him. Incredulous, Naruto shook his head. Did he now have a cousin and aunt he had never met? Fuck these individuals. As though he had heard the boy's thoughts, the sage went on. She hated your mother. Actually, come to think of it, she hates everyone. A real bitch. Always resented your equally asshole of a grandfather for never declaring her as his heiress. By the time your older sister had been born. And your great uncle moved into power after your grandfather died. She never could get what she wanted. At that, Naruto forced himself not to smile. Influential and greedy people still not getting what they want. Priceless. The Sannin rubbed his chin and told him, she is apparently just like her. In terms of attitude, that is. Doesn't get along well with the other guardians or the daimyo, but nobody can deny his talent. Apparently he trained alongside Akira growing up. Used it as an example of why he should be the heir instead of her. The Sannin nodded. I tell you, your family sucks. Naruto let out a grunt. In fact, he concurred with the man. The Kassen household. Fire Country's rulers and the faces of dysfunctional people worldwide. How in the hell did his remaining relatives have to be such fucking jerks? With her teeth shining in the dim light above the booth, the young woman smiled. The older woman scoffed from above her Chuhai glass across the table. As her unwanted guest leaned back in her seat, the buxom woman's eyes flashed with irritation. With a wave of her left hand, the young woman brushed aside her bright red hair and asked, why so glum, Tsunade? With an audible thud, the slug princess placed her drink back on the table and asked, why are you here, Hinoka? Hinoka, the redhead, looked around the seedy bar with her cold-colored eyes and laughed lightly. Part of the third Sannin's charm was her sardonic demeanor. The woman's sharp tongue and short fuse had long since become second nature to her. She had, of course, come to realize that the busty woman's remarks were not offensive. The female Sannin's barbed retorts, she had thought, were a defensive mechanism she had learned long ago. She had to be concerned about the bodily reactions. In response to the older woman's frown, Hinoka smiled back with ease and said, no reason in particular. Just in the neighborhood and thought I'd seek you out. You like to hang around bars and casinos, so I figured this city was as good a place as any in Fire Country to look. And what do you know? Here you are. The renowned medical ninja fought the urge to snort, which is not ladylike, as if she'd ever accept that. No, seriously. Why are you here? Playfully, the young woman asked. What makes you think I'm not being serious? Have I ever given you a reason to think me untrustworthy? The younger female was deadpanned by the slug princess, Senju Tsunade. Over the past 2 years, Hinoka has become one of the numerous annoyances in her life. For whatever strange reason, the young woman with the bright red hair had decided to regularly show up out of the blue, all without any prior notice. Unwanted at all times. She has a man to return to, doesn't she? The Sannin's lips quirked as she pondered in silence. The question was reasonable. How could the girl possibly have so much free time? And why wasn't it used to pursue a man? She wasn't unattractive. In their world, her flowing red hair was an uncommon sight. Her features were well accentuated by the purple kimono with yellow trim, and the short skirt and mesh armor she wore underneath it were sure to attract male attention. Therefore, why in the world was she wasting so much time teasing the alcoholic? The young woman grinned and looked around, declaring, or maybe I do have a reason for showing up. Where is Shizune-san, by the way? Before responding, the Sannin pursed her lips out. Brief and to the point. Without even glancing at the ambiguous response, Hinoka said, a pity. She's much more of a talker than you are. Tsunade gave an eye roll. She drew lead as she reached for her glass once more. Is that why you're here? The conversation? She asked. As she watched the woman swallow, Hinoka cheerfully agreed, something like that. She was able to put it back, man. As the rush of the alcohol hit her, the Sannin put the glass down again and sighed in satisfaction. One of her favorite aspects of being a medical ninja was that it was easy for her to remove dangerous chemicals from her system. She would never be seriously harmed by drinking as much as she pleased. Everyone was aware that drinking added to the fun of the day. The blonde gave a lip smack. So I say again, what do you want, Hinoka? Lazily, the redhead looked back. At last she said, information, and you're probably the best place for me to get it. The physician hummed. And what could you possibly want to know from me? She had good reason to be interested. The young woman had never really made a direct request in the entire time she had abruptly appeared. The Sannin was curious about what had motivated her to actively seek out information. It must have been significant in some way. Perhaps she had a question about the Leaf Village? Her well-known grandfather? Maybe it had to do with medical ninjutsu? Hinoka's natural smile changed so quickly to a savage one that the slug princess was caught off guard. The younger woman's eyes glowed suddenly as a potentially harmful thought crossed her mind. Tsunade's seasoned kunoichi moved into position with ease, half anticipating some sort of assault. However, instead of shining brightly, the redhead's smile softened and returned to its original form. As she attempted to downplay the recent events, Hinoka remarked nonchalantly, I want to know about one of your former teammates. Orochimaru, that is. The younger woman was closely observed by the renowned medic. Nin. Slowly she began to repeat, Orochimaru? You want to know about Orochimaru? Yes. Chirped the younger woman. Tsunade gave her a close look. She scowled and asked, and what do you want to know? On second thought, why do you want to know? Hinoka cheerfully replied, reasons. I heard an interesting rumor about an attack or something and wanted to know more. Both of the Sannin's eyebrows lifted. What attack? Orochimaru sure did a number on this place. The young man, who was in his late teens, looked at his erratic friend. The former mist swordsman's massive body had stooped to maintain his balance on the precipice. High above the renowned Leaf Village, the Nuke.Nin pair watched the devastation caused by their erstwhile comrade. The two notorious ninja were able to observe the entire village from their perch atop the monument of the former Hokage. The younger of the two felt his eyes move fluidly to a corner of the partially destroyed city without realizing it. A remote part of him took pride in the fact that, in comparison to the rest of the village, the district that contained the remnants of the Uchiha clan had sustained significantly less damage. The bigger man murmured softly from under his straw hat, this is a big place. Bigger than Kiri by quite a bit. The younger one muttered, and no less dangerous. It demonstrated how powerful his birthplace could still be. Even with every advantage and the might of another great shinobi village on his side, Orochimaru's ambitions still fell short. The elder snorted. A blue hand reached up to reposition the wrapped package on his back, saying, but he still did manage to kill their cage. And saying Suna is still a major power is like saying sake is a healthy alternative to water. Just not true. The comparison caused the former Leaf.Nin to twitch just a little. Why was he drinking water? The large of the pair went on, our target is in there. What can you tell me about the Nine Tails? The erstwhile member of the Leaf Elite looked back at his partner. He is both the youngest and weakest of the Jinchuriki. Even with the hat blocking his view, the younger of the two could sense the disbelief the larger man was undoubtedly feeling as he turned to face his partner. The question was a half-statement, but he's strongest? The kin murderer gave a nod. Yes. He reached out and tugged at his own straw hat lightly with his right hand. But Konoha has always made a point of not relying on the strength of their Jinchuriki. They do not outright train the container to harness the Biju's chakra. Simply restraining the beast was seen as enough for the last two containers. The ex-mist ninja gave a headshake. A battle-loving person would consider such a thing to be sacrilege. Then what the hell is the point of having a super weapon if you're not going to use it? They just hold the damn strongest just to say they have it? The younger gave a slender shoulder shrug. His black eyes scanned the village once more before saying, more or less. You seem to forget that the practice of creating the Jinchuriki was started here by the Shodem Hokage, and that his original intention was to use the demon vessels as a means of insurance against future wars. For the limited impact that idea had. The swordsman's inhuman voice easily expressed the emotion as he growled with audible annoyance. The massive figure shifted, asking, what the hell? I thought that we'd luck out in the fight department when we got this assignment. Having the strongest was supposed to be a guaranteed good time. Hell, I even bragged about it. The younger one shrugged once more. The former Leaf Ninja freely acknowledged, I don't even remember any sort of overt advantage. From our studies, every other Biju has bestowed their container with some sort of unique ability. The Kyuubi has not seen fit to do so to its former two containers. and none of our intel suggests that this one will be any different. With annoyance leaking from every pore, the bigger man moved the bundle once more. With sharp eyes, his smaller companion observed his brute of a partner before deciding to feel sorry for him. Sometimes he was just too bloodthirsty for his own good. Throwing a bone at the massive figure, he said, "At any rate, you'll also find some of the strongest resistance here. Even the shinobi who hate the Jinchuriki will die before they allow us to simply take him. As opposed to other villages, they will not hesitate to chase us to the ends of the earth if necessary." The bigger man looked away from the village and back at his partner. In stark contrast to what the other villages had been expected to do, the question was, what kind of shit is that? According to the majority of reports, people would be glad to see Jinchuriki go because they detested them so much. The younger shinobi's simple response was, the will of fire. The ideal seated in the hearts and the minds by the Shodem Hokage. The frown of the former Mist.Nin was almost palpable to him. That huggy-feely shit? Calmly, the younger told his partner, that huggy-feely shit is what has managed to keep the Leaf Village strong. The Leaf Village has by far the easiest shinobi graduation exam. Instead of the Cloud's uniformed skill or the Mist's brutality, the Leaf just requires their graduates to learn basic E-rank techniques along with general theory on shinobi life. In reality, it is a complex way of emphasizing teamwork. This gives the Leaf Village more shinobi than any other village, but it also makes them weaker right away. Given that teamwork is the primary component of combat in the village, this is also advantageous. Teams in the Leaf Village frequently remain together for the duration of their careers rather than merely switching ninjas for each mission. Since each group is typically tailored to a particular niche, they can concentrate their training in that area. And, what the hell does that accomplish? The bigger man drew lead. What does it achieve? It accomplishes a sense of undying loyalty and a reliance on one's fellow Leaf Shinobi, the younger said, noting the genuine desire for information beneath his companion's harsh tone. Furthermore, it guarantees that individuals who are able to obtain the title of Junin have not only mastered the art of harmoniously functioning in a team environment but have also endeavored to develop their full potential. The Leaf Village is able to guarantee that those who achieve the rank are among the most powerful in their class due to the rigorous requirement that a Junin possess a high level of proficiency in at least 2 of the 3 primary schools of combat. The Leaf Village is able to boast the most Chunin and unique Junin due to this stringent requirement. A fair description of how things work around here. His partner shifted in surprise, but the younger Noob.Nin made no move. He had known the man had been standing behind the two for a while, and the fact that he had just decided to speak now told him that things were going to get interesting. "It was as you told me all these things years ago," came the collected response. "You are the one who stressed these facts to me." As he continued to look through his trademark orange book, Hitaki Kakashi drew L languidly, "And you always were an attentive pupil. Everything did come easy to you." "The same can be said for you," the former Leaf Ninja said, turning to face his former superior in a single motion. This village praised Kakashi. "Senpai is a prodigy, and I wasn't the only one." The name seemed to register with the big shinobi, and he turned to see the man leaning casually against the trunk of a nearby tree, his head tilting curiously as the name his partner proposed conjured up a mental image. "Kakashi? Hitaki Kakashi?" the big man said, "the ninja of copy?" With a snap, the Leaf Junin shut his book. "And you are?" In response, the big Noob.Nin gave a little laugh and said, "Now that's what I'm talking about. Someone who is somewhat well known." Looking at his companion, the Leaf Noob.Nin said, "Your approval is duly noted, Kisame." Taking note of the big man's name, Kakashi straightened up a bit. "Hoshigaki Kisame? Another of the former Mist Swordsmen? Why in the world did these individuals keep showing up? It seems as if we've caught a few rats skulking about Kakashi." The Leaf Village Junin calmly puffed away with his hands by his sides, his dark eyes absorbing the 2 intruders as the 3 ninja turned to watch the son of the Sandame Hokage strut from behind a nearby tree, a cigar in his mouth. Kakashi said, "Asuma." He did so as casually as possible, which was quite appropriate considering the circumstances. "You look good today." "I should be saying the same to you," the man said, taking out his cigar and puffing out a cloud of smoke. "It's been a while, Itachi," the man said, turning to face the smaller Noob.Nin. "But greetings will have to come later." The notorious Uchiha spawn merely gave a single, friendly nod. Without waiting for an answer, the man went on, "You've got a lot of nerve coming back here. Especially for such a nefarious reason." The former heir of the Uchiha clan was intrigued by that. "Oh, why have we come here, do you know?" "How did they know?" Kakashi looked back at the man idly and said, "We do, of course. Although your abrupt appearance is unexpected, we did anticipate your arrival." "Where is the 4th Hokage's legacy?" The clan killer muttered, "How curious. Naruto is now his own ninja, something I was forced to learn firsthand during Orochimaru's little sneak attack," Kakashi said, taking a step toward the two men. "Additionally, neither you nor anyone else in your small club will be approaching him in any way." The Junin's right hand raised the Hite.8 that was covering his eye. As he removed the straw hat that had concealed his features, the ex-Mist ninja chuckled and said, "Oh, sounds serious. I want to finish this up before dinner," the Sarutobi ninja growled, spitting out his cigar and removing his two signature trench knives. "Enough talk fishy. I feel the urge to eat sushi this evening." With a flash of his pointed teeth, the blue-skinned Mist ninja spat, "Big words for a dead man. Let's see how good you really are." Itachi sighed and took off his straw hat as well, saying, "Kisame. Let's just finish them quickly." From behind the two Nuke.Nin, a female voice said, "How arrogant of you to speak as if you'll be leaving here alive, traitor." Without displaying any concern at her unexpected genjutsu appearance, the Uchiha killer responded, "With good reason, Kurenai-san. None of you have the power to challenge us." Kakashi squinted at his erstwhile subordinate, saying, "We'll just see about that." Itachi closed his eyes and opened them in a flash of black and red, saying, "Yes, Kakashi. Senpai, we will." It pours when it rains. Homura sighed in exhaustion as he thought. The village elder had high expectations for his temporary role as Hokage. That did not include a second surprise attack within 2 weeks. Less than 5 hours had passed since the village Jinchuriki accompanied the Toad Sage on his quest to find his last teammate, and during that time, the very group that the man had been alerting the village's top shinobi about just the day before had suddenly appeared, and then returned one of the best leaves to the hospital. Before the big desk moved once more, the black operations soldier was kneeling. Homura didn't want to hear it at the moment, even though he knew the man had more to tell him. His thoughts were focused on how, in the case of the Leaf Village, things seemed to be getting worse every minute. The unsolicited advice from the right of the desk was, "The fools can't even apprehend a missing .nin correct." Oh, he's also present. A headache was already beginning to develop in Homura's temples. The elder with the glasses whispered, trying to gather his thoughts as best he could, "If you'd please, Danzo. I don't think the young man has finished regaling us with his story." Slender and covered in bandages and old scars from almost head to toe, Shimura Danzo narrowed his one eye at his longtime friend. Homura chose to ignore it. Before the Anbu agent entered the office, Danzo had been there for 10 minutes. As usual, his goal was to usurp the Hokage's chair's authority. Or, now that Hiruzen was out of the way, at least claim it for himself. With gratitude, the Anbu agent bowed his head and said, "Sir, there is something else of great importance regarding the situation." As he prepared himself, Homura asked, "And, what is it? Was it the sand rattling the village walls, or was there another Biju approaching?" By now, he was expecting almost anything. The monotone delivery worked wonders when conveying facts. Uchiha Sasuke overheard some of the older shinobi talking about the confrontation. He raced off before anyone could stop him. His current whereabouts are unknown. The boy would naturally flee in a blind rage. Danzo slammed the butt of his cane down on the wooden floor and yelled, "Idiot. He should be marked down as a security threat. Send the hunter.nin after him." "Now Danzo." Homura started with saintly patience. "You've done some wild things in your days too. Can you honestly blame the young man for flying after Itachi?" At Homura, the man's lone eye glowered. "You're rewarding a lack of self-control?" Homura sighed and said, "No, I'm not denying human nature." The two were very different from one another. Over the years, Danzo had refused to see it. The man with the bandage tightened his grip on his cane in frustration. Disregarding it, Homura returned his focus to the shinobi who had provided the thorough report. It wouldn't be acceptable for his older brother to kill the heir to the Uchiha clan. Did anyone go after him yet? We can't afford to have him killed. The Anbu agent nodded and confirmed, Might.san. It was he who originally turned the tides of the battle enough to force the assailants away. Good. He was relieved of one burden. What about Hitaki and Sarutobi? How are their conditions? The masked shinobi said, "Unconfirmed, sir. Sarutobi.san was hit with a strange sword. His condition was stable for the most part." The Samahata would be that. Homura nodded and pondered. Danzo interrupted again, asking, "And Hitaki? How is that fool?" Homura could swear he felt the tension in the room rise to multiple levels at once as the operative turned to face the man. I made sure to ask the man how he felt about his position in the conversation by saying, "Undiagnosed at this point, Shimura.san. Most likely one of Hitaki's former teammates." Homura observed the brief conversation with mild amusement and pondered. They still regarded him as one of their own, even years after he had retired from the Corps. As he attempted to steer the conversation back on course, the elder asked, "Please elaborate, what is the problem?" The man turned away from the frowning Danzo and confirmed, "Sir. Reports say that Hitaki-san is just fine physically. It's his mental health that seems to be what is keeping him from waking." Homura acknowledged, "I'm not sure I understand. Some sort of genjutsu? They were particularly well known among the Uchiha clan." The member of Black Operations nodded and said, "That's what initial reports say. Though not one any of our medic.nin have ever seen or heard of before. The other shinobi present during the conflict say that Hitaki-san went from just fine one moment to completely falling to the ground in the next, all without warning." After exchanging glances, Homura and Danzo scowled. A genjutsu powerful enough to easily defeat a shinobi of Hitaki's level. Furthermore, it would have needed to totally overcome the inherent mental protections that the Sharingan bestowed upon its user. Only one genjutsu that either of them was aware of was capable of doing that. Tsukiyomi. Homura grimaced as he thought it would be an issue. Homura smiled thinly and said, "Very well. Things seem to be well in hand at this point. Send any viable information my way if need be." Before disappearing in a body flicker, the Black Ops agent bowed his head. Homura's smile vanished the moment he was certain that the room was clear and that the people would not benefit from realizing how much trouble they were in. Danzo mutely demanded, "We need to have the Jinchuriki return at once. He's in danger beyond the walls." "He's in danger everywhere." Homura sighed in response. "No matter where we hide him, Itachi and his associates will be able to follow. You're forgetting that this isn't the only real show of force they've had. Even Orochimaru is at the very least wary of their power." A grimace formed on the Warhawk's face. "It would still be better to have him inside the village. We can't allow for the Kyuubi to fall into enemy hands." Homura gave a nod. He moved forward and rested his head on one palm that was upside down. "I agree, but at the same time," he said, "the best thing we can hope for now is for Jiraiya to complete his task. He will be able to keep Uzumaki safe enough for the time being." Danzo gave a snort. His tone betrayed his disdain for both of Sarutobi's pupils. "Do you honestly believe that fool will be able to convince that even bigger fool to return to the village?" he asked. He had always detested his rival's three pupils. Homura prudently disregarded it. He answered, "Yes, and now more than ever." Not that he was certain that Tsukiyomi could be healed by traditional medicine, but Itachi's genjutsu is far beyond the capabilities of even our best medics. We will need Tsunade's expertise if we have any hope of Kakashi return to form. Danzo scornfully replied, "For what little good that will do. If he was half that man his father was, this would have never happened. Itachi would have died here in the village and Orochimaru as well." Unwilling to express his agreement with the man aloud, Homura hummed. Sarutobi Hiruzen's former teammate said, "There's little we can do now. As it stands, things will rely on Jiraiya and Uzumaki. In the meantime, we will continue with our plans for defense. There isn't any way to tell if Suna or Otto is waiting the bushes." When the man had finished speaking, Homura looked at him, searching for emotion. Danzo gave me a blank stare in return, regarding what he anticipated getting. Danzo said, "Maintaining eye contact, agreed. But we need to work on the Jinchuriki's Biju training." He had been emphasizing for years that not using the tailed beast is a serious detriment to the safety of the village. Homura, for once, concurred with the man. He said sternly, "We've been aware of that for some time now. But that's easier said than done, and it was a unanimous decision to make sure the boy had a rounded skill set as a shinobi first and foremost. It won't do us any good to have him rely so heavily on the Kyuubi's power over his own. If this Akatsuki is as dangerous as we believe them to be, then it isn't out of the realm of possibilities that they have some way to negate the tailed beast and their powers." Danzo scowled. "We don't know that for certain." Homura calmly retorted, "We also don't know what they are capable of. It would be arrogant and dumb for us to send the boy out into the world with only the Biju to his name. And no matter what you think, power is useless without the experience needed to use it properly. Uzumaki was made a chunin because of the skill he showed during the exam and the attack on the village. We'd be doing a huge injustice to him, Hiruzen, and his parents if we simply try to lock him up behind the village walls like you seem to love to advocate for." Danzo remained silent and instead used his one-eyed glare to express his disapproval. Homura warned, "For now, we'll just need to see how things play out. Jiraiya won't let anything happen to the boy, you'll see." He was certain of that. Phase 7, the pursuit. Well, I'll be damned. As he clenched his right hand to eliminate the phantom pain his chakra had created, Naruto raised an eyebrow at the Sannin. The remnants of the water balloon that the toad sage had given him 8 hours earlier were sitting off to the side, close to his legs. The blonde Chunin grimaced and asked, "Was that right? That's what you said to do?" The sage, who had been sitting at the base of a tree, leaned forward and nodded. "That's it, all right." An eyebrow was raised by the blonde. "So what's the problem?" The Sannin immediately responded, "It was fast, too fast." The blonde gave the man a sidelong glance but remained silent. Instead, he chose to get up from where he was lying on the ground in order to stretch his legs. Jiraiya was only partially focused on his charge because he was still processing what he had just witnessed the new Chunin do. What the fucking odds? Naturally, though, he was at fault for having any expectations. The one individual who defied the norm was Naruto. In retrospect, Jiraiya's expectation of a few months failed to take into account the specific person he was speaking with. Furthermore, considering the jutsu's creator, the blonde was even more motivated to finish this portion of his training as quickly as possible. Still, though, to finish the Rasengan's first step in a matter of hours? Unbelievable. Once more, I exerted pressure on him, to himself the Sannin thought, by pointing out that this specific ninjutsu was created by Minato. Furthermore, he had assured the blonde that this would be the final lesson he tried to impart to the boy in the context of the fourth Hokage. Naturally, Naruto was not required to be aware that the elderly sage was initially incapable of executing the Hiruzen. If the boy had come this far because he wanted to complete his ninjutsu and stick it to the fourth from beyond the grave, comparing the boy to the most well-known Hokage, what else could he do? After all, the little bastard is somewhat brilliant. The sage took mental notes while examining the Chunin. In just 2.5 months, he had seen how much the boy had changed him more than he had ever imagined was humanly possible. It was more than the boy's demeanor or his clothes. There was something about the blonde that seemed to be changing. Knowing that the Sandame's few confessions had fundamentally altered the child's perspective on life was a little depressing. He's getting much better at dressing, though, so I'll give him that. With a slight jolt of laughter, the wise man pondered. The blonde benefited more from the green vest than the black one from earlier, of course, but it did offer a little more protection and more pockets to store necessities. When the blonde finally found himself facing the older shinobi, he asked, "So what's next? You mentioned 3 steps." After giving his younger counterpart a quick glance, Jiraiya nodded. "That I did, but I don't have the necessary tools for you to start the next part." Naruto's left eyebrow went up. "Tools?" Jiraiya nodded wisely and said, "Yeah, rubber balls." Quiet. The blonde trailed off before he regained his focus. "Right, so what will we be doing until then?" The Sannin reached over and picked up his pack nearby, saying with an upturn to the corner of his lips, You'll be doing something super fun. You'll be taking the time to learn something new and useful." The blonde scowled as the man gently threw something in the direction of the Chunin after removing his hand from the back. Before he could even look at the front cover, Naruto grabbed the objecta Ibuka out of the air. As his left hand's fingers lightly rubbed the book's spine, his head cocked to the left in a curious way. "An introduction to Fuinjutsu?" he asked, his bewilderment clearly audible. "Is this because of me being an Uzumaki?" The Sannin said plainly, "Yes." Naruto turned to the back cover and gave a slow nod. "I figured. But I don't know just how much I'll enjoy this." "It's in your blood." The sage shook his head and said, "You'll enjoy it just fine. Not to mention it's something that can give you a serious advantage where other ninjas are concerned. Most don't ever take the time or effort needed to fully focus enough for the art." The blonde looked up to meet the man's eyes and asked lightly, "And I will? I know my flaws, old man. I can barely sit still long enough to eat my ramen." The Sannin's left hand went up. He told the Chunin, "That won't be a problem with me. I'll show you how to make and change seals as we go along, and I know how to make learning something like this enjoyable and helpful. It won't be all technical work before you can try it out yourself like others like to do. Additionally, it will provide you with a competitive edge over the other Jinchuriki. Despite their biju, you can easily turn the tables on them if you have a firm grasp of the sealing arts. And you'll be able to manage making the required adjustments to your own seals if something were to happen to me." Though he had no real desire to learn such a time-consuming art, Naruto couldn't deny the effectiveness that Fuinjutsu possessed, and unlike the brief overview the Sandame had given him, Jiraiya was giving him the chance to learn the smaller details needed to give him a real advantage. Naruto frowned again as he considered the man's words. The reasoning was sound, and the ideas were well thought out. It would also give him a connection to the Uzumaki name. As he opened the book, Naruto said, "Okay. I'll read this book while my clones handle the chakra nature and shape manipulation stuff. Don't forget you'll need to work on your physical training." The Sannin issued a warning. "You can't fall behind on your taijutsu either." The blonde deadpanned, "Yes, Mom, I know that very well. Ignoring the reply, the Toad Sage went on, in the meantime, we'll be going on to the closest city. Check to see if we can't find Tsunade's trail. Apparently, they were lucky because the woman had been seen in Fire Country for the first time in a long time. Where is that, too? We've been looking for a while now with no signs, the blonde asked, skimming the book's introduction. She's around. The Sannin stated resolutely, that's for sure, and Atofika Guy is where we're going next. The newest Leaf Chunnin's eyes narrowed as he looked up from the book and returned to his traveling companion, the fabled shinobi. Guy Atofika? That location is renowned for its red light district, he said, tilting his head to the right. You wouldn't want to take advantage of this opportunity to relax, would you? Jiraiya snorted at his dubious companion, asking, what do you think I am? That was the immediate response, a shameless pervert. And I'm proud of it, but seriously, I know what's at stake, the Sannin said, grinning. We must return to the Leaf. I will not be playing around. Naruto gave him a suspicious look and said, we'll see. The wise man's eyes rolled. Calm down, child, nothing will occur. To quell the growing annoyance, the slug princess shook her head. It was unsuccessful. The blonde Kunyachi gritted her teeth and said, for the last time, Hinoka. I don't know where Orochimaru is hiding. It was almost a mystery to the slug Sannin how the girl had figured out which room she was staying in, but the young woman with the scarlet hair smiled back cheerfully from her position lying flat on the hotel room bed. With little concern for the woman's growing rage, the younger Kunyak said, I got that part. But I've still got to keep asking these questions. Why? The slug Sannin frowned. The young woman, still sporting her bright smile, answered hazily, for reasons. Serious reasons. This was not the time for the redhead to be showing up again, and after eyeing the younger woman, Tsunade shook her head and stalked over a chair by the hotel window. It had been a long day and appeared to be far from over, as she had racked up enough debt to support a small village and was currently out of alcohol. So, what are you looking for? With a snarl, the Sannin sat down in her chair and demanded. You, after blinking in surprise, Tsunade turned to face the girl with suspicion. What? Deadpanned, Hinoka said, not like that. Then what? Why are you coming now? Asked the agitated Sannin. The woman shrugged her shoulders and said, I'm here to deliver an invitation to you because my last attempt to get information from you failed and I've been ordered to try a different approach. A request? Tsunade crossed her arms over her large bust and asked flatly, what is the invitation for? Hinoka squared her shoulders and looked directly at the Sannin, shaking her head and saying, not what, who? And that who is the Uzumaki clan. Tsunade blinked again, struggling to keep up with what had just been said, and then her eyes shifted to the younger woman, who was staring back at her with as much of a serious expression as she had ever used with the slug Sannin before. The Sannin opened her mouth to respond sharply, but the weight of the words hit her first. I apologize? The Sannin closed her eyes to dispel any other thoughts. Did you Zhu? Without warning, the younger woman interrupted, saying, you heard exactly what I said. I'm not going to repeat it. I didn't, of course. As if to blow something away, she waved her left hand in front of her and said, because what I think you just said is impossible, like really impossible. With a lifeless expression, the redhead gazed back at the Sannin, saying, nothing in this world is impossible. Tsunade's mouth opened to say something else, but she forced herself to close it. She closed her eyes again as her mind began to piece together what she knew about the young woman sitting in front of her. A chill went down her spine as the small details she had initially glanced over began to add up and make a lot of sense. With each bit of information she remembered giving the younger Kunoichi's words more weight. It was her hair that kept coming back to her mind. The girl's famous red hair was once said to have belonged to her own grandmother, and more significantly, it was the same shade that a young girl in Konoha had once worn. She even mentioned that she occasionally practiced fuinjutsu for pay. She knew that she wasn't the force she once was on the battlefield due to a lack of practice, but that was to be expected given that she didn't regularly conduct spars or participate in battles, but that wasn't an excuse for her non-combat expertise to have faded thus far. Somewhere in the back of her mind, the slug Sannin felt a sliver of disgust begin to form. Somewhere along the line, she even lost the ability to draw clear conclusions from the information that was given to her. Had she really lost so much of her skills? She thought more irritably, of course they have. I'm a fucking disgrace to grandfather's name. However, that wasn't either place. She asked the other woman, half spoken, you've been hiding. Hiding for all this time. The slim-shouldered Hinoka shrugged and said, we do what we have to do to survive. The Sannin sighed in response to the ambiguous response before shaking her head once more. How many? Following a moment, The younger woman pursed her lips and said, I'm not going to tell you that. The only reason I'm saying it now is because we need your assistance and you have Uzumaki blood running through your own veins. The unspoken response was simply enough, which meant to the other elemental countries. Too many. Tsunade nodded silently as she dissected that final passage. She thought quietly, if anyone found out that even a few of the Uzumaki had regrouped, they were supposed to be scattered about, forced to die out. As allies, the Leaf Village had let them down in the first place, and she could understand why they hadn't gone to Konoha. The Uzumaki had, of course, survived this far by staying out of sight and hiding in the shadows, so how could they be certain that the Leaf Village hadn't intentionally allowed Uzushiobakir to fall? The Sannin said abruptly, you want information on him because you want answers, Orochimaru. Her eyes hardened as she absorbed the young woman's equally solemn poise on the bed. You want to know if he had a hand in the village's collapse. She had also heard of the idea in recent years, so it wasn't difficult to figure out. I understand why you've been hanging around me so much now. Tsunade had much more to say, but the redhead chose to remain silent and wait patiently for the Sannin's response, which was perfectly acceptable to her. The Slug Princess started off by saying, I can't pretend like I know what it's like to be an Uzumaki. My grandmother didn't teach me much about that before she passed away, and the only other Uzumaki I knew was a little girl when we first met. Additionally, I have no idea what it's like to have everything you've ever known or loved taken away from you by people who are terrified of your gifts. However, I would like to warn you about what you wish to do. With a thin smile, the younger Kunoichi said to the woman, we'll keep that in mind. So, Tsunade thought, mind your own damn business. What is included in this invitation? Since a representative of a long, dead clan didn't often appear for a conversation, she was at least intrigued. I've already told you most of what I know about Orochimaru, she said. We just want to talk, the woman said, swinging her legs off the bed. A high-ranking official wanted to meet you in person. Tsunade said bluntly, that's rather vague. It's possible that you're trying to trick me into falling into a trap. Then Hinoka stood up and shrugged her shoulders, saying, once again, I have yet to be untrustworthy with you. Tsunade crossed her legs and challenged, which means nothing in our profession. All it takes is once. As she turned to face the older woman, the redhead said, be that as it may, I think you'll still like to hear us out. It's just a conversation. After a moment of silently staring back at the younger woman, Tsunade made up her mind. I won't say that I'll come for sure, she began, but I won't tell anyone and I'll think about it. With another shrug, Hinoka responded, good enough for me. The meeting will start in precisely 2 months tomorrow in Cha no Kuni at the Digarashi port gate. Come or not. Then, we'll be aware of your intentions. Tsunade spit out a sour, fine. Is that all? Knowing that this is most likely the last time I'll see you, the younger woman nodded and said, that's it, it's been amazing. As Tsunade watched the young Kunoichi leave the room, she retorted cynically, I'm sure. When she was certain the girl was gone, the slug Sannin, who had a terrible headache from the whole ordeal, sighed with relief. The Uzumaki clan is something, she thought as she got up from her chair and headed for the bed, still alive and kicking. I hope that nothing more noteworthy occurs in the future. I promise to all that is holy that I will fucking kill him. On the other side of the frame stood two strange men, one more so than the other, whose Hite.8 indicated that they were members of the Leaf and Mist Shinobi forces, but whose horizontal strike cut down the center gave the universal sign for Rouge Ninja. The blonde Chunin froze his mind as the mantra ran through his head, his body frozen in its position standing in the doorway. Naturally, the blonde was more interested in the distinctive cloaks that both men wore black with red clouds strewn about it, the call sign of the group that the Toad Sannin had told him about just a week earlier, the group that had made it their mission to hunt the Jinchuriki, or, to put it another way, him. Akatsuki. The blonde thought, fucking old asshole, jinxing me and shit. Stop worrying, Naruto. You need to relax more, kid. Nothing bad is going to happen. You didn't hear me. I asked for you to step outside Uzumaki.kun, said the younger looking man, a stout, dark-haired teenager with a permanently detached expression on his face. He spoke in a lazy drawl. A nervous right hand reached back to rub at his head after the blonde was startled into motion by the words. I apologize. Naruto smiled and walked to close the door with his left hand, saying, but my mom told me not to listen to strangers, so please come back later. With his gaze fixed on the blonde, the shinobi's hand extended to force the door. With little more than a flex of his wrist, he calmly brought the boy back into view and said, I know for a fact you've never spoken to your mother before. She was dead long before you could even comprehend your first words. Oh. The door was pushed open with force, and Naruto managed to say, well, it sounded good in my head. The man remained silent, however, his bigger companion did. The odd noob.nin grinned and laughed, saying, "Cheeky little shit. I think I like him." Naruto gave the man a blank stare in return, his eyes making a sharp observation. "Your skin is blue." The man's smile turned to a frown. "Has anyone ever mentioned that you had blue skin?" Despite the circumstances, the blonde persisted, saying, "And clammy looking too." "Yes. I gutted her for it." Not even a year later, the smile returned. "My mother said something like that right before she threw me out of the house." The blonde thought his family was strange, and he couldn't help but raise his right eyebrow at the declaration. "Itachi, can we cut him up a little?" At the knees, the bigger man snarled, in order to prevent him from fleeing. The smaller Itachi suggested to his taller traveling companion, "Please contain yourself, Kisame. We don't want the Kyuubi to be lost because he bleed out." To meet its brother, the blonde Chunin's second eyebrow lifted. "Itachi?" With equal parts surprise and awe, he asked, "As in Uchiha Itachi? Someone who went completely insane and murdered roughly 3/4 of his family?" The teenager with the black hair just stared back. "Hey, you seem to have a fan," the blue-skinned Kisame said abruptly. The blonde's palms started to perspire, and he thought, "Yep, I'm screwed. What a bad time for Jiraiya to act like himself." He could only take one action: stall when in doubt. "I assume you're Akatsuki? Very frightening Biju hunters?" the blonde said nonchalantly as he leaned against the door frame to his right. Konoha.nin, who was once well known but is now notorious, raised his eyebrows and said, "You know who we are?" With his mind racing, the blonde shrugged and said, "Just some small rumors. Beat up Orochimaru. Out to do something like destroy the world. 9 fierce ninjasa." 10. Itachi corrected coolly, "Orochimaru's small stunt in the leaf gave us plenty of time to retrieve his membership due. We are 10 in number. Or, if you include an information specialist, 11. "Itachi, are you revealing private information? That isn't like you," the monstrous Kisame remarked, shaking his head. "It won't matter much in the near future," the younger shinobi shrugged. The information is no longer useful to him. Naruto noted, "You're already counting me out. That's not a nice thing to say." Kisame smiled once more. "Yes. We are. I could have several tricks up my sleeve." The brunette responded. "I'm kinda put out that you think so little of me." "What we think of you has little bearing on what is fact," Itachi clarified to him, "and that fact of that matter is that you are largely out." Kisame looked at his partner out of the corner of his eye as he straightened up, but the noob.nin abruptly interrupted him, his black eyes narrowing at a spot on the floor before his Sharingan flashed to life. "Hello, Sasuke." The blonde remained in the room, having sensed his old teammate's approach from the moment he walked into the tiny motel, and Naruto watched as the Uchiha missing.nin slowly turned his body to face the stairway. At the end of the hall was another young Konoha shinobi, this one with short black hair and colored eyes, a genin he ventured from the lack of a flak jacket. The mist noob.nin raised his blue eyebrows as he looked back in the direction his partner had turned. Mist Kenjutsu asked languidly. "My stupid..." Kisame blinked. Uchiha was grounded out, saying, "You dared to return to fire." The former Konoha ninja remarked, "You look good." His sentence died in the middle of, "Have I been?" And he claimed it was all in vain. "You son of a bitch." He shifted into a bright red. "Another Sharingan?" "Not all of them," said the clan killer, shaking his head. He said in a tone that was as casual as it had been from the start, and him in his eyes, "I have plans." Itachi seals and roared. With his developing chakra, genin prepared to attack. Naruto fought the urge to a gripping sound roared to life. The blonde thought, people with such a dangerous technique? Another phased curiously at his younger brother, Chidori. Sasuke practically growled, "I have lived every day with hatred," as he battled to control the volatile lightning chakra. This isn't going to be good, Naruto thought, great opportunity to get away. As it was, the village jin was the heir to one of the 2 founding clans. Which would allow him to escape through the hotel window and into the crowded from his captors long enough to locate Jiraiya. Huge waste to let the Uchiha clan heir die just 2 weeks leave, and if he was going to die, he didn't want to do it like leaving Sasuke to probably die at the hands of his older brother would be. He was deprived of the decision. "Perish," the Uchiha heir screamed as he dashed down the hallway. Rage, his lightning elemental chakra tore plaster and penned away as his right came around to hold the ninjutsu like a thrust. The blonde watched with wide eyes as the forming the boy's outstretched wrist just below the raging ninjutsu. With a loud boom, the entire hallway was treated to a scene his shoulder before slamming him roughly onto the hallway floor. Then the air was filled with a sharp crack. His left foot down on the boy's chest with enough force to make the boy his once loved older brother cleanly broke his wrist. The teen looked down at his younger brother and said, as he exited the room and entered the hallway, Naruto's body and stopped on his left knee as he turned back to face the smiling held outstretched in his left hand. It was only his new. Instead, the blonde dropped smoothly into a crouch, going, "We aren't done with you yet." The man with the blue skin, Naruto made a snake seal with his hands slapping together. Repusho. The Sandaime Hokage had jutsu was not the same as mastering it, and he had taught the blondes his techniques at will and adapt them to nearly any situation. Through countless hours of Kage Bushin and battle experience, still thought he was pretty damn good. The Mist Ninja technique, while the twin barrels of wind ninjutsu rushed across wood and whipping up dust in their wake. The blue breeze as the remnants of the chakra extensive technique rushed past and watched with wide eyes as his ninjutsu seemed to be stopped clean. All right, that wasn't meant to occur. Eyes were drawn to the man's weapon's vibrating form. The tightlets. The man's smile widened even more as he gazed. "I can tell that there's something special with it, Kisame. Samahata really likes the taste of your chakra." The declaration caused the blonde's brow to furrow. "Does it I see your confusion 9. Tails. That you're unable to understand what I'm discussing. What the hell?" His eyes. The smile broadens. A shudder went through his body as a foul chakra started to. Naruto turned his body enough to see both threats out of the corner of his eye, markings spreading across the younger Uchiha brother's skin. As more and more of the strange chakra started to waft up, he gave his answer by tilting his head to the left and looking at his younger sibling. Reached up with his good hand, trying to move the foot that was trapping him. "Only a failure like you would let that man get close enough to Orochimaru. He's to blame." Naruto reasoned. Chakra, a sickly purple color that appeared to be even more Ichibiya became visible. A flash of a memory tension between the ever-brooding Uchiha clan heir Sanin given his former teammate that seal, and when did he have stealing it during the preliminary round, which is why Sakura wanted Sakura. It must have happened during the second part of the Chunin sealing technique. If they were so determined to keep about what happened to the boy now, they didn't want Naruto's help. A cord of displeasure was strung somewhere deep inside the blonde, or it died, leaving a stony visage in its place. His own. "I will murder you." As he clawed and screamed, "I'm going to fucking kill you." "And how will a pitiful shinobi like you manage to do that?" To a nearby wall with a heavy thud. His good hand desperately struggled for a moment before pulling his right hand back and landing a former leaf prodigy pulled his foot away without hesitation. Hands. Prior to pulling back and forcing the boy, Uchiha leaned in to his brother and whispered something too low for him to hear, before announcing something loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your class has managed to leap past you." His tone, boy. Naruto merely raised his left eye on the smiling mist noob. Nin he had been dealing with previously. His wild eyes slid down the hall to meet the impassive face of the "Your hatred is insufficient. You're a disgrace." "Come," Itachi added, reaching up to slap the boy's face. "You never will. Stop talking. The boy shall you, I promise." As the genin's screams wonder how the hell no one else has come out of the other rooms yet. I'm curious about what's happening out here. Death threats were beat as best he could as his eyes locked on his older brothers, and Itachi's, determined to put an end to this game. Itachi's her sibling above his head. "No. The fear. No. Yes. Itachi, you will spend the next 72 hours witnessing our clan's demise and again. As I killed them one by one, I won't." The boy's screams had become desperate as he struggled to morphing eyes. "God no." As the Mangetsu nightmare, Itachi harshly intoned, "Tsukiyomi," screamed bloody murder, and Naruto winced. "I don't." As he watched the boy yelling uncontrollably, the big man with using the conversation to distract himself from the sug. "Pretty much everything he does is annoying to me. Bitches who thinks the world belongs to him by birthright." Type. Naruto rubbed his hands together and clapped. Kisame grinned broadly. "Oh." With his hand out. A trail of black markings appeared on the boy who watched with interest. A half-second later, two faced different directions before racing towards each opponent. The former Uchiha clan heir casually hopped the leg, but Itachi calmly darted backwards as his clone. The clone shifted its weight before performing a lifting gained its footing. The mist ninja smiled as the blue take a step back at the blonde's unexpected weight. With a flex of his bicep, the bundle in his left hand dropped to its knees to avoid the strike. Utilizing the clone launched itself forward into a shoulder check. Catching him around the waist, he asked, "What's up with this clone?" in response to the question. The challenge of learn last few months. Although it was cool to envision different texts that in practice, such things were difficult to accomplish. Disregarded ways that made them unique. From the chakra's flow. However, this did not preclude the use of one ninjutsu. Naruto and his clones spent modifying their chakra nature, the easier it became. Naruto was certain that he was significant progress in his skill development. Hours of but surely work his way towards mastering his shoten. He seemed to think he would one day be able to, but he had made great. With a simple flex of his chakra coils, he could now and when there were no easily accessible materials nearby creatively. Crystal release. Shadow clone explanation for this particular jutsu was straightforward and charmed in jutsu during a battle with the Toad Sage, and after encountering the blonde was suddenly struck with inspiration. Unable to create the crystals out of thin air, he would use his own body. Since the armor applied chakra to his skin, rare methods appeared to be subject to. From there, the sword master was as fast as a whip. Reachly hopped backward. Itachi was equally prepared, believed to be an exploding shadow clone not unlike the ones he himself. Strange occurrence when the two clones they had been fighting with suddenly eyes in astonishment. The skin of their clones abruptly protruded, leaned back as he retreated even more, and the clone he had been pierced his skull when they appeared. What on earth is this way as well? What sort of jutsu is this? 6 abruptly multiplied into 20, with some barely as their targets. Naruto didn't respond, though. Practiced movements, the blonde pulled free 6. Not finished yet. Before his chakras he had ever encountered, dropping to one knee as he threw his of his clones, rather than waiting to see if his kidnappers had shoten, crystal wall, crystal release. His keen eyesight watching as the chakra flowed through the strained, creating a spiky wall of chakra that protected 2 crystal mounds the clones had created began to shift and serve his hotel room and out the window. Naruto thought, I can become a Amaterasu. Itachi stepped through the hole made by his with one eye closed, looked at the surrounding crystals with stopped mid step as he looked back down the hall in time. The new Chunin watched with wide eyes as the spot grew into a whiz of his defensive structure. With what sounded like Kun. I've never seen such a technique before. Naruto replied, that's right. So. Slowly, the Uchiha Noob.Nin nodded. Secret technique. He made a thin line with his lips and said, I'm surprised that I need to resort to it here. And Naruto's gaze shifted to the building's ceiling as a series of heavy eyes the sound as being the footsteps they were. These the sword user fell from the sudden hole he had made. The big man smiled and said, you see this shit? Held him back, you see it? Itachi answered. I was all like, what the fuck, when it came up. Itachi replied, I've never heard of anything on that, sir, have I? Really? Where in the hell did you get that, kid? The shinobi with the blue skin asked his target. Old man Hokage said it was unique to me, Naruto said. Already died. I've been attempting to better understand it. Fact as he said, it's pretty awesome, but it didn't save her of what to say in response. Naruto stared back left off, saying, that is to say, can we wrap this versions you may have planned? Just to know that. Well, save them for the afterlife. To save you Toda. Rasengan. Itachi the makeshift battlefield through the hole he made, his face wearing his current proto-copyright copyright was in. Abruptly collapsed, feeling the sharp pieces of wood stab in Blonde's fallen form to gaze at the smaller of the two attackers. The clone trick worked wonders. Assured you that it would withstand, Naruto said, raising his head to glare at the man. With a shrug, the Sannin said, I knew you'd feel intense. Jiraiya chose to ignore it. And to look at the other, then barked as he took in the sight of the smaller man. One of the Mist's renegade swordsmen and a former Mist. Greeting, Jiraiya of the Sannin. One of the same for you. If you didn't murder a number of people while Lord. After giving him a long look, the Sannin shook his head. Ball of spiraling chakra, the man said, you don't need to tell alive. They got out alive. Hey, what gave you that brilliant idea? Picking up the slow's impromptu escape, Jiraiya scowled. Just saved by me. Taking into account that the least you could have done was that. The sage scowled. Because you tempted fate. And you never do that around. I am hated by fate. As he moved to examine the down form said, don't be ridiculous. Nothing like that has ever had any more unexpected attacks. Excellent entry. Sannin was kicked across the hall. Well done, bastard.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.